Blog Talk Radio.
Again, our guest today's program, Dr. Frances Cress-Welsing. I wanted to touch on because you mentioned the anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany, which was racism, white supremacy, and you talked about how racist Adolf Hitler worked to discredit Jewish scientists that he said were non-white people. Could you share that with our listeners?
Hitler referred to Albert Einstein, one of the most brilliant physicists, that it was Jewish science, that it wasn't white people's science, it was Jewish science, and seeking to discredit what he had to say and chasing Freud, chasing Einstein. They had to leave Europe to save their lives.
Wow. It's very important. I hope people will keep that in mind. Constant work of racism, white supremacy, and discrediting non-white people, particularly non-white people who work against a system of racism, white supremacy. Quite a few folks.
I would interpret Mr. Tim Wise' comment about me, if he said it's pseudoscience, bullshit. That's like saying that's Negro science. That's a black person's science. I'm white. I'm the authority on talking about racism, white supremacy.
Wow.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and Justice, and to share constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works. Thank you for tuning into the broadcast. Again, want to make sure I say, goal of this program is to share constructive information. If you do not find the information to be helpful, constructive, please invest your time and energy in something else. We do not want non-white people to be wasting time. Before we get started with today's program, I do want to tell folks, if you are a first-time listener tuning in for Mr. Tim Wise, I would encourage you to check out some other programs here at the C.O.W.S. I suspect if you're tuning in to hear Tim Wise, you've heard him before. You might not have heard the context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and Justice. So I would encourage you, check out some other programs so that way you can get a better understanding of what we do here at the C.O.W.S. I understand it could be a little strange tuning in to this program. But yeah, check out some of the other programs. Lots of other folks have been here. Dr. Peggy McIntosh, Dr. Joy DeGrew, Dr. Frances Cress-Welsing, Neely Fuller Jr., Cynthia McKinney, quite a few other folks, white and non-white, have been on this broadcast. So check out some of the other programs. And Tim Wise, this is his fifth time being on the program here at Blog Talk Radio. You can go back and check out some of the other programs with Tim Wise, and I think you'll hear some interesting things, inconsistencies. I think you'll be able to point out, and some very interesting, significant consistencies as well. Check out some of the previous broadcasts. But getting to work, I believe we have Mr. Wise with us.
Indeed.
Timothy, are you there?
I am indeed. How are you, Gus?
I am still being heavily victimized by the system of white supremacy. How are you, sir?
I am doing fairly well today.
Wow, I think we are, you've been on the line 60 seconds, and we've got our first reference to share. Consistency, that would be that one of the consistencies that you will note if you listen to some of the previous broadcasts with Mr. Wise. Justice, if you're there and you have questions you would like to ask Timothy, your line is open. Please go right ahead.
What do you learn about being a racist?
Say it again, what do I learn about being a racist?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you could clarify that a bit for me. Like, what do I learn from whom? I'm just not clear on the question. I'm sorry.
What do you learn from being a racist?
Oh, what do I learn in the process of being racist? What does that teach me? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think that's a good question. I think that the thing that white folks learn as a result, and myself included, of having internalized racist thoughts is, and we try to unlearn it, but it's hard to do, is this notion that we are somehow better than non-white people. That's what we're taught. That's in every possible textbook. It's in the media. It's what we hear from, virtually every authority figure anywhere in the society. And I think you learn that as being a white person. Every white person is fed that information, and we all learn that. And then the question is whether we're going to try to unlearn it, whether we're going to try to challenge it, or whether we're not. But that's what we learn, I think, is this notion that we're somehow superior in one way or another, or many different ways.
Do you have non-white people in your family?
In my immediate family, like direct family?
I was done with the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. Go ahead.
Do you have non-white people in your family? If so, do you talk about racism, white supremacy with them?
Okay. To my knowledge, certainly not in my immediate family. No, there are no folks of color or non-white people in the immediate family. There may be, distant cousins. I would imagine there might well be, but no one in the immediate family who would be classified as a non-white person. So, no. If I did, I would have that conversation with them, I'm quite certain, but we don't have anyone, to my knowledge, in the family that would be classified as non-white.
How do you get better at using words?
How do you get better?
Yes.
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, on the one hand, you try to use words that are as precise as possible. And I try to, I would imagine you try to, Gus tries to. And we get better at it, I would hope, by practice and by, knowing the way that we're using words, trying to use words the way that we intend them. But, it's like anything, I suppose, is practice. You either use imprecise words or precise words based on how much you try, how much effort you put into it. And I try to use words that are precise for what I'm trying to say. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail,
Okay, that'll be all for now.
Before we go forward, I do want to point out, again, realize we have folks who are tuning in for the first time. I snickered. It's not actually funny because we've touched on this repeatedly. I think if you go back and listen to the programs, I've been prompting Timothy about using the term fair because of the racist implications. In fact, it is an act of racism to use the term fair to in any way associate white with justice, legitimacy, accuracy, being valid, that is an incredible act of racism, white supremacy. We've discussed this repeatedly. He has never contested this, but he continues to do it. So I snickered just because, racism. And it's in many ways it shows me when he talks about being a white ally, when he talks about his dedication to being anti-racist, the fact that he can't even discontinue the use of the term fair when I have prompted him about this repeatedly that shows me a lot about his real commitment to ending white supremacy as soon as possible. It's not really funny, but, just for folks who are tuning in for the first time, that's what's going on with the term fair. Listen up. I suspect he'll say it again. He said it repeatedly over the program, so I suspect he'll say it again. Just listen up and be aware that I have prompted him about this. He knows why it's incorrect. Looking at my calendar, let's set up May if we can, please, sir. With May 30th, same time that we've been doing, 6:30 p.m. Central, would that work?
Let's see, the 30th on the Sunday. Yep, that'll work.
Okie dokie. May 30th. Okay, so that's 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Central, and 4:30 p.m. Pacific. May 30th, Tim Wise, that'll be number 6 here at the C.O.W.S. Okay, got that. Groovy. I want to, and also for the folks who are listening in, if you would like to download any of these programs, share them with your friends, this is on iTunes. You can get to the iTunes link easily if you're on the show page here at Blog Talk Radio. There's a little symbol at the very top of the page. It's right next to the C.O.W.S, written in blue. It's a little, it looks like a little satellite or a little mail in the middle of a symbol. Just click that. It'll take you to iTunes, and you can pick any of the programs that you would like to download. Even if you just want all the programs that Timothy has been with us, you can get all of those at iTunes as well. I wanted to start out when you were on the program in April, earlier in April. We discussed your visit to Chapman College in California. One of the non-white females, Malia Cunningham, she was there. I think you all had a dinner or something. She listened to the program, the Easter program, your last visit. She listened to that program, and she had comments, and she actually had questions that she wanted me to ask, so I'm going to read her letter. I guess this is one constructive thing that has come from doing these programs. I met her because of you. I just met her because she heard you give your presentation, and we have a mutual friend. So because of Tim Wise, I got to meet a gorgeous non-white female. Yay, Timothy. Okay, these are her questions, Malia Cunningham. She said that she spoke to all of her friends who heard you when you went down to Chapman College. No one was interested in listening in to the program and believing that Tim Wise is anything to be suspicious of, which is what I expected. That's the first part. And I think you and I both agree that is a problem, a major problem that we have discussed repeatedly, exactly why I have conducted the program in this manner, because non-white people are not suspicious of you. And she was not surprised. I'm not surprised. I suspect you're not surprised. Her questions. She listened to the program. White supremacy, definitions, what Tim said on the show last time. First, ideology, like a belief system. Ideology, some people think white people are born superior. Second, the systemic level, systems or a social order in which white people are dominant over people of color, disproportionately white over non-white. She goes on and she says, Tim, you say that ideology is connected. You can have the ideology and believe it and not necessarily be in a position to exercise it. You can also have a system of white supremacy where the white person may not consciously sit down and say, I'm better because I'm white, but that white person still participates in the system of white supremacy.
Right.
Therefore, if you are allowing yourself to be labeled as an admitted white supremacist, which of these are you agreeing with, or is it both? That's her first question, so I'll let you respond to that.
Which am I agreeing with for me, or which am I agreeing with as general definitions?
Well, these are your definitions that
right.
she
So obviously
gave.
I agree with both. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. So I assume that what she's asking is which of those do I think applies to me?
Right.
I'm assuming. Okay. In that case, then I am claiming the second of those two. I do not consciously believe, nor do I think that it is a significant part of my subconscious, though I'm sure it's there at some level, the first thing, the idea that white people are superior. In fact, I work really very hard against that notion. I think that's total nonsense. But I'm sure it's been ingrained in me, and I'd be dishonest if I didn't say I'm sure it's there and it can come up. But the second part, the systemic part, I absolutely acknowledge applies to me and any other white person, no matter how good your intentions are, no matter how much you reject the overt notion of white supremacy ideologically, you are still implicated in that system if you're white, as far as I'm concerned. That's true for every white person, even white folks who were active in the civil rights struggle, who were active in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of their founding this month. And there were white folks who were deeply involved in that, but I don't think they would say, at least I hope they wouldn't, that they were not in some way implicated in that system. I think most of them would acknowledge that, and I certainly would. So I'm saying the second of those is what I am acknowledging is absolutely the case for me. And when I, quote unquote, admit or confess or whatever term you choose to use or I choose to use or others choose to use to white supremacy or racism, that's what I'm thinking of ultimately. And other people can decide whether they think the other one also applies to me. But what I'm thinking of when I make that admission is that second piece.
Okay. I'll share my thought before I get to the rest of her question.
Okay.
His commitment, or I guess you said that you don't believe it's a significant part of your unconscious, the programming training you have received to be a racist, white supremacist. Exhibit A, I don't even know how many times Mr. Wise, Timothy, has used the term fair on this program. I could play 5 clips right now if I wanted to, and there are others. I haven't even gone through to collect all of them, but he's done it every program since January. He's used the term fair, and he knows the racist implications of that. So at this point, it would be like if you're a parent and you tell your child not to do something, I don't know at what point, but I think there would be a threshold where you would say, him just saying, oh, I forgot, would not fly. At a certain point, you've prompted and prompted and prompted. You know you shouldn't be doing this, and you continue to do it. That right there, I think, tells me a lot about his conscious and or unconscious commitment to racism, white supremacy, his continued use of the term fair. But I'll move forward with her questions. Again, Malia Cunningham down at Chapman. Therefore, that's not it. Okay. If you say you are just going along with the system of white supremacy, that doesn't make sense because your work directly contradicts that. Not one time during your speech did I think, in quotes now, you know what Tim is saying makes sense, but I think I should still be suspicious that he indirectly or directly practices white supremacy. Do you have a response to that?
Well, a couple things. As far as the part about it not making sense, I think it does make sense if you think deeply about the way that white supremacy has been ingrained in white people. It makes perfect sense to believe that even a white person who is striving, maybe striving mightily to challenge that system in themselves and in the larger society, will still have to grapple with it and struggle with it every day. It's like anyone who has internalized any kind of pathological thought system. You try to fight it, but it's never something that's totally eradicated. And so I think it does make sense to think that on the one hand, a person can be racist at the level of what they've internalized and yet try to be anti-racist, but never be so sort of smug that they say, okay, the work is done. And that's what I am saying, and that's what I've tried to say on the show in various ways for the last, several times that I've been on the program, with or without success. But that has been my goal and what I've been trying to get across. So I think it does make sense. As far as the idea that she says, she never suspected she needed to be cautious or curious, a couple of things. Number one,
I think the term she used was suspicious.
Oh, suspicious.
Correct the term.
Excuse me. Yes, absolutely. As far as her never thinking she needed to be suspicious, I think I would say two things. Number one, that acknowledgement on her part is quite a bit different than the way I recall you characterizing it last time, which was that she had essentially insinuated that I was Jesus. So I don't see that she has confirmed that comment, which I'm pretty sure we could go back and look at the tape of the last show, and that's essentially verbatim what you accused her of suggesting. So that, too, seems to be a significant departure from her previous comment, assuming that you were being honest about what she told you the first time. The second thing is that it seems to me that if she wasn't sufficiently suspicious, that could be troubling, as you and I have both talked about. We both agree that I think it is perfectly logical and helpful for folks of color, to always look at white folks who are claiming to be anti-racist and think, you know what, I have to be careful with this person because they could go south on me, so to speak. They could easily drop the ball, and I need to be careful. Now, here's the only difference I think that we have, and this is something which I don't know if we've gotten into it before on the program in real clear terms. I haven't. It's my fault because I haven't asked you to clarify it for my own sake or the listener's sake. I have to say, the idea that a person of color in my audience, Malia or anyone else, isn't sufficiently suspicious, let's say at the level that you are, and I realize you feel that's a huge problem. I feel it's a problem, too, because I've seen white folks, including myself, historically drop the ball, right? Even when we claim to be about something, we still drop the ball. But it seems to me that this idea that her not being suspicious enough of me is a huge, like the most important thing, like the critical sort of linchpin thing. I'm not quite sure that I get that, and I guess the thing I'd want to ask you so that I can get some clarity on it, because I'm frankly a little befuddled, and I'm a bit ashamed to acknowledge it 4 episodes or 5 episodes in that I haven't asked you before, is if she isn't sufficiently suspicious of me, what happens? Like what is the harm that comes to Malia, who I think is a very capable, intelligent person who we had a great conversation with 5 or 6 other people at dinner that night. What happens? I mean, if I give a speech and she hears facts or data or statistics that are helpful, that are true, that might help her as a woman of color know about these things, you know, maybe some data she hadn't heard before, statistics she hadn't heard before, which no one, you or anyone else, has ever said, I'm using false data. If anything, I'm giving data that's pretty clear about the problem of white supremacy. If she doesn't suspect my personal commitment enough, what happens? Like, what is the specific harm in your mind that then befalls her or the other people of color in that room? I mean, do they all of a sudden turn the whole movement over to me? Do they start trusting all white people? I mean, I just want to know precisely what happens. If I give some information and she isn't sufficiently suspicious, tell me specifically why that hurts Malia. Because I honestly, I mean, unless she like turns the whole ball of wax over to me, which I'm not asking for, nor would I expect any person of color to do, I'm having a little bit of a hard time figuring out what the specific, you know, awful linchpin harm is in that is precise, you know, and maybe Malia in her conversation with you got a sense of that, but I'm having a hard time grasping it.
We'll see if we can clear that up. I do want to go back. I have said repeatedly, and this has not been specific to Malia because I just met Malia. I haven't even known her a month. What I've been saying consistently all the way back to last June is that a significant number of non-white people, and I would say more than half of the non-white people who hear you speak about racism, white supremacy, do not leave with any level of suspicion with regards to you, Timothy. They leave thinking the Savior has been here. This is the greatest white man in the history of the world. I just want to touch the hem of his garments. As I said, I know non-white people who this is true for. So I don't know if it applied to Malia. As I said, I just met Malia, so I know I wasn't speaking about her. Okay. When you were on the program in January, when you were on the program in February, I just met her weeks ago. So it's not anything specific to her. It is non-white people in general who you come in contact with. And I just want to go back, and again, I'm just reading directly from her letter where she said, I spoke to all my friends who heard Timothy speak, and not one was interested in listening in and believing that Tim is anything to be suspicious of, which is what she expected. That is an enormous problem in a system of racism, white supremacy, where it is impossible for a white person to not be racist. And the definition that I use for racist that you agreed to, directly, indirectly, consciously, and or unconsciously harming an individual because he or she is not white. It is impossible to be a white person in the system of white supremacy and not conform to that definition, i.e. practice racism in some way, shape, or form. So the fact that non-white people can hear you, unadmitted racist, and leave and be totally unacceptable to even opening their mind up to suspicion that you could be racist is an enormous problem. I cannot overstate it. And the fact that you would even say, I don't see where that's a problem, that right there, I think Tim Wise is pulling my leg here.
No,
You've been on the program that said, wait a minute, hang on, because you were here in June and you said you think that is a serious problem. I will make that a sound clip if there's any debate over that. In June, when you were on this program, June 1, 2009, you said that, in fact, you believe that is the most serious problem when non-white people hear you and they do not demonstrate that they are suspicious of you. That's what you said. So the fact that these people can hear you and they can't even open their mind up to Tim being written, no, get out of here.
Well,
that's the key.
Okay, if I can. I think you're right that they should have listened to the show, and I'm sorry that anyone wouldn't, just to get the back and forth that we've had, which I think has been, in large measure, quite productive on a lot of different levels. But as far as it being a problem, no, I've totally acknowledged that it is, and I'm not saying it's not now. But my reason for why it's a problem, I think, might be significantly different than yours, and that may be part of why we're not necessarily gelling on what we're saying here and why you think I'm saying one thing, I think I'm saying another. The reason that I think it's a problem for folks of color to not be suspicious when white alleged anti-racist or claimant anti-racist try to do this work or say that that's what we're about is because there are too many examples in history, I mean tons, where folks of color have been burned by putting too much faith in white anti-racist, quote-unquote, allies, turning over too much power to us, giving us too much authority, turning over grassroots strategy to white people. I think that can be really dangerous, and I think you and I both...
I'm carrying over my interrupts from the previous... Actually, they're interjections. I heard that presentation where you've given your view on that. The root of all that, the root of why it's dangerous to not have that suspicion is it's because it's impossible for a white person to not be racist. That's at the core. It doesn't really matter if you don't agree or share my view as to why non-white people should be suspicious. It's correct and it's logical. Okay. Everything that I'm saying is valid. If what I just said is not true, that would be one thing. You haven't said anything to say it's not true. I've asked you a question. Wait a minute. I'll answer your question, but this is important.
No, you won't, Gus.
I'm not going to answer your question?
I don't think you're going to answer it.
Okay, well, let me finish this, and then we'll see who's correct. If I'm going to answer your question or not, I might need to restate it. But at any rate, the core of why it's dangerous to turn power over, as you just said, or to not have any level of suspicion or question about these white people is because it is impossible for a white person to not be racist. That's getting at the core of what all this is about. People don't hear you and think, Tim Wise, even up here talking about racism and giving us all these juicy facts that Gus is ignorant about. And let's be clear, you are the expert on racism, white supremacy. The people that are the experts are the racists themselves. So you would be much more informed. You would be a much better person to talk about racism than Gus. No argument there. But the fact is you can do all that and still practice racism. Consciously and or unconsciously, you've done it on this program. So for non-white people to hear that and conclude the exact opposite and be totally unwilling to even open their mind up to the possibility that you could be a racist? I mean, that right there, I have to suspect that is your intent. That is what you want to produce, is that level of confusion amongst non-white people where they don't think Timothy is a racist when he most certainly is.
Okay, so Gus, I would like to restate my question. The question was, give me because I was trying to tell you why I thought it was dangerous to not be suspicious, but you didn't let me finish. So I'm not going to try it again. I've said it several times. But I want to know the specific harm. Let's assume you're right. I'm going to start off with the assumption that no one is or very few, if any, are adequately suspicious, and that they don't take into consideration even the remote possibility that I could have any level of internalized racism, even that to which I have acknowledged, even that to which I have admitted, right? So that's fine. Let's say that's true, and let's say you're absolutely right about that. The question then is, tell me specifically what those people of color who insufficiently suspecting me of anything, what did they then do that harms people of color or non-white people, including themselves? Now, you mentioned a second ago the notion of giving over too much power, and I totally agree with that. If folks of color were lining up to say, hey, Tim, give us the strategy for undoing white supremacy and run our nonprofit organization and run our local community-based grassroots effort, I would totally agree. That would be messed up. Of course, number one, no person of color has ever asked me to do that. Number two, I've never accepted or even thought about doing anything like that. In fact, when I'm asked for strategy, I typically say what I've said on this show at least twice, which if you want...
Do you have a question?
Yeah, the question is, tell me specifically what it is that those individuals do after not suspecting me enough that creates harm for non-white people.
Okay, bam. I will answer your question, so you were incorrect. You stated before that I was not going to answer your question. You were incorrect. In fact, I think that could be a conscious act of racism for you to get out and say, you're not going to answer my question.
It was a challenge, Gus. I would have offered it to any radio host who
I think it was I suspect, be accurate with my terms, I suspect that could have been a conscious act of racism, but I will answer your question. Okay. Specific harm that comes to a non-white person from hearing you not having and specifically demonstrating a significant, a high level of suspicion. They spread confusion. I can give it to you short. They spread confusion. They spread an inaccurate understanding of racism, white supremacy. What I have said all along since I have been doing this program, non-white people are confused about what racism, non-white people are confused about what racism, white supremacy is and how it works. The chief tactic of a racist white supremacist, you agree to being a racist, is deception, spreading confusion amongst non-white people. So for non-white people to hear you or any other white person and leave with an inaccurate understanding of racism, white supremacy, specifically not understanding I should be suspicious of every white person, regardless of what they say, what they do, as long as the system of white supremacy exists. That person is spreading an incredible amount of confusion that will be manifested in a variety of ways, be it having sexual intercourse with a racist and thinking that nothing is incorrect about that, be it that I'm going to turn over my entire nonprofit organization to Timothy or another white person because I know this person is not a racist. I don't have any suspicion. That could never cross my mind. Here you go, Tim, and here are my children, too. You can babysit them as well. It will be manifested in a variety of ways. So to make it very simple, it is spreading confusion and an inaccurate understanding of what racism, white supremacy is and how it works. And you know this.
Can I ask you a question? Thank you for answering the question. Now, I'm fascinated by your answer, and I'd like to ask a follow-up. Do you have a single example of anyone of color in my audiences, either at the speech that you attended in Seattle or at any other time, who after hearing me speak has gone out and had sex with a white person because of that, or has turned over any substantial part of any nonprofit organization or grassroots effort to white people? Not just me, but any white person, because I know they haven't turned anything over to me, nor would I have accepted it, but any white person as a result of hearing me speak. And if you do have examples, I would like names, because I doubt seriously that you can point to a single solitary example of what you have just claimed will happen as a result of people being inadequately suspicious of me. I mean, it's fascinating.
Well, see, the thing, see, you ask a question, but then you give a commentary.
Yes, I
Can I get the question so I can, give me the question again, please, so I can answer it.
I would like to know if you have a single solitary example of any non-white person in any audience of mine for the past 15 years who, after hearing me speak and being inadequately suspicious of me, has then said, gee, I think I'm going to go have sex with white people now, or I think I'm going to go and turn over my entire grassroots nonprofit strategy to white people, because after all, Tim seems like a good guy, so I assume I can trust all of them.
I cannot point to any non-white person and say conclusively it was because of Tim Wise, but yes, I can point to specific non-white people who have heard you speak, and after having heard you speak, that person demonstrated confusion. They spread confusion about racism, white supremacy, and I can list specific ways. Now, I can't hang it all on you because this is ongoing. The confusion is being spit out everywhere. So I can't say that if they had not heard Tim Wise, they would not be doing these things. I can't make it that conclusive, but you certainly are not helping. You are not doing what you claim, what you allege to be about, which is working against racism, white supremacy. What you're doing is on par with the way I see racism, white supremacy being practiced every day, which is to have non-white people not suspicious of white people.
Okay.
I can't hang it entirely on you, but I can definitely say you are contributing to the maintenance and refinement, and I want to highlight that. You are contributing in a huge manner to the refinement of racism, white supremacy. And yes, I can name specific non-white people, victims of white supremacy, that you have had a huge impact on in terms of their confusion. Maria here in Seattle would be one. Now, this is a non-white person. In fact, let me share a story with you to show how implicated you are in this, Timothy.
Okay.
Maria, I don't want to give her last name out because she might not be cool with that, but Maria here in Seattle, she was present at the lecture that you gave last spring here in Seattle with the Bush Speaker Series. Mm-hmm. She assisted you in selling books. Do you remember Maria?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. She is a non-white female, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Now, Maria, after your presentation, now I can't say it was because of you, but I definitely think your presentation and you were a contributing factor and a significant factor. She had a meeting, Husky Efforts Against Racism, okay? Now, she did this presentation with a white person, with several white people, I believe. There were several white people in attendance, and I believe there was at least one white person who was working with her organizing this event.
Is that like a University of Washington thing, just so I'm clear? Is that like a University of Washington? Yes, this is a
registered student organization at the University of Washington.
Okay.
Not only did she not have a definition for racism, someone asked her what was her definition for racism. She didn't have a definition, and she did not realize what an extraordinary problem that is to allege to do work against racism and you don't have a definition for racism. Right. That was problem number one. Not saying that's you directly, but that was problem number one. Number two, there was a white person, the white person who was working with her, white woman, who was an English major. When this point was raised and someone shared, hey, I mean, this is extraordinarily incorrect. You've got to have a definition for racism if you're going to do this work. The white person said, hey, I'm an English major. What you just said is totally correct. I understand the importance of words and definitions. That's what we talk about all the time. That is 100% accurate. And she said it with a smile. And people pointed out, hey, how can you let this go down when you know the importance of words? How can you let this go down without a definition? I suspect that could be an act of racism. Maria had no suspicion at all and proceeded to defend that white person. I would say that right there, in my view, shows the influence, the negative and corrosive impact that your work has on non-white people, where it ends up being, well, Tim.Wise is not racist. There must be other white people who are working against racism who are also my white allies in replacing white supremacy with justice. They're just like Malia Cunningham's friends who do not suspect Tim.Wise could be practicing racism, white supremacy, even when he's up chatting with us at Chapman College. Maria's example, not suspecting that this white person that I'm doing this work with, not suspecting she could be a racist too. She could be doing things in the organization to support and practice racism, white supremacy. If you give me time, I'm sure I could list some other examples of people where you have spread confusion with the work you do. Does that answer your question?
Well, no, I think it's a great answer, and I appreciate you offering it to me because it gives me some clarity on what you're getting at. I don't doubt that it is possible for a person to come to hear a speaker, myself, or even if it's a non-white person who is, you know, not themselves particularly suspicious of white folks or clear about white supremacy, who could go away from the talk being defensive on behalf of white people, as you said. I'm sure that can happen. But I will say this. I mean, you were at my talk in Seattle, and the talk I gave there is fairly standard. I don't give the same talk.
He did it again. Highlight that second. I told you. You were incorrect. I'm not going to answer your question. You were incorrect in your assumption. I assumed you were going to say it again, and you just did. I want to highlight that. This is Timothy Wise, who alleges to be committed to practicing anti-racist work, alleges that racism, white supremacy is not a significant part of his unconscious mind, his unconscious thinking, again saying fair on this program. And he knows that is incorrect. He knows that is an act of racism, white supremacy. Please proceed.
Okay. As I was saying, I think that it is possible for someone to walk away from that kind of speech with that particular interpretation. But I also know that you were at that talk. It is a similar talk to other ones that I give. It's not always the same. I don't give the same talk every time. But primarily what that talk focuses on are a couple of things. Number one, the long-standing practice of white denial, that is to say, white folks who, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary that we have all around us, that you and I would probably no doubt agree upon, that is blatant about the existence of racism and white supremacy and all different aspects of human endeavor, that the majority of white folks in every era, going back 150 years, have said, oh, it's not a problem. And so I make that point very clear. And the purpose of me bringing that up, of course, is also, I think, pretty obvious to my audience, right, which is that you must assume that even when the evidence is blatant, the vast majority of white folks, for any number of reasons, some of it intentional, maybe not always intentional, but for whatever reason, the vast majority of white folks have always thought there wasn't a problem. And so you need to think about that when you're trying to determine, is racism a problem? Who do you listen to? Do you listen to white folks who say it's not by and large, or do you listen to people of color who say, of course it is? And my argument, made explicitly in the speech, is, of course, we should start with the judgment of people of color. When they say it's a problem, they are in the best position to know because they're the ones feeling it. So we need to start with the assumption that it's not white folks who know, it's people of color. That's the first point that I make in every speech, just about. The second point is, of course, trying to document some of the injury of white supremacy.
Okay. Okay, I'm stopping there. This is very important. I'm stopping there, and I wrote down what you were saying. The second part of your lecture is to document some of the injury. I want you to pick back up right there.
Okay.
But it is important. What you just said, in your presentations, your understanding of racism, white supremacy, it's, you say people of color, I say non-white people, victims of racism, white supremacy. They are the ones who understand when something is a problem. We should be listening to them. I have said repeatedly, Timothy, the way that you give your lectures is a problem. you are not responding to me as following your own logic. Hey, non-white people, people of color, they're the ones who understand when something is a problem. I have said it as many ways as possible. I provided evidence. I've even had people who've heard you give your presentations who've come away with the exact same feeling that I have. Man, I would not, listening to him, think I should be suspicious that even Tim Wise could be practicing racism, white supremacy right now. Even Tim Wise is a racist. They do not leave with that understanding. We can cut to the chase, Tim. If what you just said is true and you really believe that, your lectures are a problem, Timothy. What are we going to do to correct that problem?
Well, the thing is, Gus, that when I say that I believe people of color's judgment about racism in the society is the judgment we ought to listen to, I'm saying that people of color are the ones in a position to know when they are being victimized on the job, when they're being victimized by cops, when they're being victimized by bankers and all the teachers and everybody else. And usually white folks don't listen to that. Now, by the logic of what I've said, and I'm not saying that this is true because you and I have at least a basic level agreement that suspicion is a healthy thing, although you may take it to a level that I don't, but we both have a basic level agreement. But if what I'm saying is true, and it's what I really believe, and it is, then the fact that most people of color say very blatantly that they believe racism is a problem in this society, that they believe that discrimination is a persistent reality in this society, to me is credible. And the fact that most people of color, for whatever reasons that you may have a real problem with and that I may even think are problematic, even if I don't take it to the level you do, don't suspect me enough, I start with the assumption that people of color or non-white peoples, et cetera, whatever term we use, are perfectly capable of interpreting their reality so that when they see me speak, instead of being sort of, I don't know, it's like I'm spreading some kind of crazy foo-foo dust that makes them incapable of thinking straight about the problem, I don't start with the assumption that that's true. You may start with the assumption that's true, that somehow I confuse people who are otherwise perfectly intelligent and capable of thinking, but I come in and I totally make it impossible for them to function in an anti-racist way. I don't start with that assumption. I'm assuming that non-white peoples are capable of challenging white supremacy and of challenging me if they suspect me, with or without me prompting them to do so. And that's where you and I think, have a genuine disagreement. But it isn't a contradiction for me to say, on the one hand, that I believe that non-white peoples can be trusted to interpret their own reality, and yet...
Can I ask you a quick question, Tim? Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
You said that you start with the belief that non-white people are perfectly capable of interpreting their reality, thinking for themselves, coming to their own logical conclusions. Mm-hmm. Just a yes or no. The system of racism, white supremacy, works to undermine non-white people, victims of racism, white supremacy, works to undermine their self-confidence and their belief in their own judgments, thoughts, and perceptions. Is that a true statement? I'd just like a yes or a no.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Just with that right there, and the fact that we still are in a system of racism, white supremacy, I would think that would need to be factored in, that these people, a big part of their abuse is that they really have been attacked in terms of being able to make logical judgments about the world in which they live.
Well, except for one thing.
Wait a minute, because this is important.
Okay.
And especially with regards to hearing a white person speak and a non-white person speak. You know, just being a white person, you have more credibility than me, than any other non-white person. You have a lot more credibility just because you are white. And that would be true even if you were a female. Just because you're white, you would have more credibility. So I don't think we can truthfully say, I can just go to the podium and assume that non-white people hearing me will be able to come to their own accurate conclusions.
I mean, we can't
acknowledge. We can't acknowledge that in a system of white supremacy. It's got to be just the fact that you're a white person. Just the fact that you're a white person up here talking is going to have a lot of sway over non-white people, regardless of what I'm saying. If I should happen to throw in some truthful nuggets about racism, some accurate information, I mean, hey, I'm going to have a lot of room to persuade a lot of non-white people and get them on my side easily. So the fact
You're right.
You could use, and I want to get back to my question because I asked the question. Your lectures are a problem. Non-white people not leave thinking I should be suspicious of Tim Wise. I should be suspicious of any white person.
But
what
here's
are we going to do about that problem?
Okay, but here's the thing, Gus, and I have to respond to what you said a second ago because it seems to me that we're missing something between you and I that's going to translate badly to people who are listening to the show. I am not saying, when I said a second ago, you asked me for the yes or no, is white supremacy intended to confuse people and break down their defenses and all this other stuff, and you're totally right, and I said yes. But what's interesting to me is that in spite of that, in spite of the fact that white supremacy is intended to do that, in spite of the fact that white supremacy is intended to make folks of color or non-white peoples think that they're seeing things. I mean, I believe that's what the system is intended to do. And you might well agree. You might put it a different way, but we probably would agree on that, I think. The fact is, the vast majority of non-white peoples, in spite of that truth, continue to say year after year in survey after survey, study after study, and our personal experiences as well, that they know racism is still a social crisis in the country. Now, white folks have been trying, I'm talking about in the collective sense, for years, for generations, for centuries, to tell non-white peoples it's all in your head. There's no problem. It's a fully equal opportunity society. You have nothing to worry about. And you and I both know that's nonsense. But white folks have been trying to say that. The system has tried to teach that. Schools have tried to teach that. And yet, in spite of that, non-white peoples have retained, in spite of the attempt to break down their defenses and make them think they're crazy, have retained the truth that says, you know what, that's all nonsense. Most black and brown folk in the world today, and
That's not what we're talking about, Tim.
Yes, it is, Kyle.
No, it isn't. Well, that's not what I'm talking about. You're right. Let me be correct. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? I'm not saying that non-white people do not understand racism, white supremacy is alive and well, although I will definitely say you have a large chunk of non-white people who are even confused about that, and that's demonstrated consistently. You can, anybody that's interested, you can listen to the archives of this program. You'll hear a lot of non-white people say, no, I don't believe there is such a thing as a system of racism, white supremacy. So a lot of non-white people, yes, they drunk the Kool-Aid on even that, Timothy. They've even been confused and don't think there's a system of white supremacy.
Well, then they
but be that as it may. Wait a minute. I don't know if they have or not, but there's a significant number of non-white people who've come to the conclusion that there is no such thing as a global system of white supremacy. What I can say, Timothy, that what I'm talking about, not the fact that you have a lot of non-white people who are confused about racism and white supremacy existing. You have a significant number of non-white people who hear your lectures and are confused about all white people being racist. That is going to happen as long as we have a system of white supremacy, and it is logical and correct for non-white people, victims of white supremacy, to be suspicious of every white person, no exceptions, including you. Right. That's what I'm talking about is the major problem. And you don't seem, by your conduct on this program, you do not seem receptive to taking steps to correct that, even when you acknowledge, yeah, that's a big problem. Can we read the disclaimer? I mean, I gave you a paragraph. I emailed
you did, and I actually wrote a very long response to you that I neglected to send to you, and I will do it after this program so you can read it. There are a number of reasons why in the response to you, and I can talk to you about what they are now too before I send them if you'd like, why I don't believe that disclaimer as written is the way that I should go or the way that other white folks who claim to do this work should go. But I will just say this, and it goes back to the question that I asked you a second ago. This idea that, okay, let's say, again, that you're right and that non-white people come to the talk and they aren't sufficiently suspicious of me. But let's say, for example, I get up, I give this talk. I give all this data about white denial. I give all this data about the harm of white supremacy. I talk about how white supremacy happens in every arena, jobs, criminal justice, housing, education, healthcare, et cetera. Now, some of that data might be data, some of that statistical information might be information that the folks in the room, including the non-white folks, didn't have yet. and maybe it will prove helpful. Even you have suggested in previous encounters with me that there was some data that I offered that was potentially helpful, the data on skin tone and immigration, for example, and income. There's other data that I shared that folks find helpful, that they think might be useful in the struggle against white supremacy. So let's say that those folks leave the room. They've seen me speak. They've heard me speak. They think whatever it is they think. Maybe some are suspicious, but they still like the data and they want to use it. Maybe some are not suspicious and they love me and they use the data to try to help in some way or another in their institution or their school or whatever else. Okay, fine. Let's say that they go forward and they are now thinking to themselves, wow, that Tim Wise, he seems to be a pretty good guy. There might even be others like him. I don't know for sure, but gosh, it's possible because I saw this guy tonight and he's great. Unless there is something to suggest that my talk or the work or my books, in which, by the way, if any of these people have read my books, I'm very clear. I mean, White Like Me, I talk specifically about my internalized racism and white supremacy, so no one could read that and be confused. It's impossible to read that book and come away from it thinking that Tim Wise is not in any way racist or white supremacist, and you couldn't do it. So the people who said that either haven't read the book, I mean, they simply couldn't have. It's blatant. I talk about it in an entire chapter. But let's say they walk away from it and they have this Pollyanna attitude, this idea that, oh, now I can trust Tim Wise. Unless you believe that they then come away with this general trust of white people, which seems to me pretty counterintuitive because, after all, my whole talk is about white supremacy. So it's almost like you would have to believe that they were saying, gosh, that Tim Wise is great, and yeah, that Tim Wise is so brilliant. He told me that I should be wary of white people and white supremacy, but, he's such a great guy. I'm not going to trust him on that. I can trust him, and yet I can't trust him. He says white racism is a problem, but it can't be a problem because he's such a great guy. There's like an internal contradiction in that I don't know how you can resolve. If I'm talking about white racism all throughout the speech, you would think that those individuals would be even more suspicious of the systemic problem. Maybe they're not suspicious of me, and that's a huge issue or whatever, but if they are more on guard against the system.
No, Timothy. I have seen no evidence that people leave with a greater suspicion for the system of white supremacy. The system is people like you, Timothy, and I have seen no evidence that that is the case. In fact, what I've seen is that it reduces suspicion of white people who sound like you, who talk about racism. Yeah,
how many of them are there?
Just wait a minute. I was just at the White Privilege Conference. There's hundreds of, I suspect thousands of them who have heard you either live and direct, seen your videos, read your books. It is rare that I bump into a non-white person who has heard of the legend of Tim Wise and demonstrates any level of suspicion of you and other white people who allege to be anti-racist.
Why would they still come to the White Privilege Conference? Why would they still come to the White Privilege Conference, these non-white people, if they think all white people can be trusted? Why even bother? Wouldn't it suggest that, oh, there is no problem with white privilege. I trust all white people. Why should I even go to a conference to talk about that?
I didn't say all white people, see?
No, I'm talking about non-white people.
Wait a minute. I didn't say all non-white people. I've consistently said a significant. I said I can't think of a non-white person that I have met that has demonstrated a significant amount of suspicion, really any suspicion of you. That has been unheard of. The response that Malia Cunningham got, that's the exact same response that I've got from non-white people consistently. They don't think you're a racist. They think that is the furthest thing from the truth. And if you really want to do constructive work about racism, white supremacy, if you really want suspicion, what would be better than all the statistics that you can pile up in your talks? Yes, I have said that you do give out accurate information about the system of white supremacy, damage that it inflicts on non-white people. Okay. But that's standard racist white supremacist tactic. A racist white supremacist can give you some tidbits of accurate information and package that with quite a bit of confusion. That's what I saw at the White Privilege Conference, and that's what I see with you. The fact that trumps any constructive information that you might give out. Even if you name drop, hey, Dr. Joy DeGruy, excellent work, check that out, or Marimba Ani, not Dr. Welsing's pseudoscientific bullshit, but some non-white people that you think are constructive, all of that is trumped by the fact that non-white people and significant numbers leave and are incapable of conceiving of you as a racist white supremacist. That is an extraordinary, wait a minute, that is an extraordinary problem. And like I said, I'm getting too much resistance around this from someone who says, hey, we should be listening to non-white people if they say this is a problem. I'm saying
I said we must listen.
Wait a minute, you're still interrupting me.
Well, Gus, I can't tell when you're stopping and when you're not.
I'll let you know. I'll make it very clear when I'm done with my point, sir. Okay. It is an extraordinary problem. It is my conclusion, the non-white people who demonstrate a high level of suspicion. And I would correlate that with their understanding of racism, white supremacy. And Noel Ignatieff, suspected white supremacist, he said the exact same thing on this program. Strong correlation between non-white persons' suspicion, high suspicion of all white people, and their understanding of racism, white supremacy as a total world system. If you really want to assist non-white people, help non-white people understand no exceptions. Every white person, racist, white supremacist, that is what white supremacy means. It conditions individuals who are classified as white. It trains them to be racist, white supremacists. It's unavoidable. I haven't avoided it. I can't point to a white person who has avoided it. Understand what that means when you conduct yourself with white people consciously, unconsciously, directly, indirectly. You should expect white people to mistreat you. If you are not white, you should expect it. That's what white supremacy means. Even me. If I say anything here today that's constructive, that's of value to you, that's great, but make sure you remember, I am a racist, white supremacist. I've been trained to be such, and even though I've been doing this work for 20 years, I might do it for 40 more years. As long as this system exists, I cannot tell you that I'm not a racist, white supremacist. You should be on your toes. You should think of me. As a racist white supremacist that alleges to be working against racism, white supremacy. That would be constructive. That would be conveying an accurate understanding of racism, white supremacy. But I do not get your conduct. It does not suggest that you're interested in doing that. And that's fine. You've admitted to being a racist. You consciously and or unconsciously practice racism on the program. I would just put this on the list as you further consciously and or unconsciously practicing racism, white supremacy. It's very simple. I'm not saying anything that's not true. Just say that so that non-white people understand it, so that we don't have what's happening at Chapman, where hordes of non-white people aren't even interested in hearing somebody say, wait a minute, you should be suspicious of Tim Wise, which is true. I want to check to make sure Justice, I'm not missing her because she hasn't participated in a minute. Justice, do you have some questions you would like to ask Timothy?
To eliminate racism, white supremacy, what are the top 3 most important things non-white people, victims of racism, should keep in mind at all times when interacting with white people who you say are all racist white supremacists?
Right, okay. I would say the 3 most important things for non-white people to keep in mind when interacting with whites under a system of white supremacy would be the following. Number 1 would be that the system of white supremacy has conditioned every white person, even those who aspire to be and claim to be allies, to accept at some level, conscious or subconscious, deliberate or not, notions of their own superiority, and that those individuals can, as a result of that conditioning, end up dropping the ball and acting on that conditioning, even when they don't want to, even when it's not what their goal is, what their intent is. So that number 1 is recognizing that conditioning is there. The second thing that I think is important for non-white people to keep in mind is that their own experiences with racism and white supremacy, whether it's in school or on the job or in the neighborhood or with police or whatever it is, are really the best indicators of what the truth is. In other words, they should not listen to the larger sort of white community's I guess, words that we use oftentimes to act like racism isn't a problem. You know, the mainstream sort of media and politicians and teachers and everybody else sort of try to put out this idea that racism is a dead issue, that it isn't a problem anymore. And yet non-white people know that it is. Or by and large, most non-white people know that it is. And I think it's important for non-white folks to keep that in mind so that when they're interacting with white people, they don't get carried away with the idea that the non-white version of reality is more accurate than their own. I think that the white version, of reality is more real than their own. That non-white people know what they're experiencing, and that they have to keep that in mind when they're interacting with white folks, especially when those white folks are trying to tell them that it's not really a problem. And then the third thing that I think is important would be it's important to know the history of white allyship and how it's worked both for good and for bad. You know, so for example, non-white people, when they're interacting with white people who are claiming perhaps that they are allies or whatever, need to know that historically, yes, there have been white allies. Yes, there have been white folks that struggled against the system, but there have also been white folks who struggled against it for a while, and then they got bought off, or then they dropped the ball. They ended up not really following through. They didn't really come to the assistance of non-white people when non-white people asked for it. So it's important to know the ups and the downs of that so that they don't assume that a person who claims to be an ally is always going to be there. One of the things, I'll just give you an example. One of the things I tell people, non-white people, when they ask me this question, let's say they work at a college or something, or they work at a company or government agency or whatever, and they ask me the question, what do I need to be demanding of my white colleagues? What can I ask of them? Because they're talking about experiencing racism on the job or something. And my response is always, if you have white colleagues who have claimed that they are allies and who claim that they want to fight racism, you have to be, if you think that they claim to be that and that's what they swear they are, then in those moments where you need them to have your back, to support you, to defend you in a job situation or to a teacher or whatever it is, that's when you need to tell them, look, you say you're about this, I need you to show me that you're about this. But in order to do that, you have to know that historically, a lot of white folks who've claimed to be about it, when the going gets tough, they get going. And when it gets risky to those white folks, sometimes they drop the ball. And keeping that in mind is critical, because if you don't keep that in mind, you end up relying too much on white folks to do the work for you, when, frankly, the best work and the most important work against racism and white supremacy has always been done by non-white people.
How does racism and white supremacy work in your speech and action as a racist white person?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
How does racism and white supremacy work in your speech and action as a racist white person?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, my answer would be this, that obviously being a white person and standing up and giving a speech, let's say, against racism, white supremacy, where I try to talk about the harm that it does and I try to talk about the history of it and all that, that in a way, me giving that talk, just being a white person, just being a white person in that system, giving that talk, talking about those issues, as Gus said earlier, conveys to me a certain degree of legitimacy or credibility that he would not be given, or that any non-white person would not be given, no matter, we could be saying the same thing. Gus and I, or any non-white person and I, could get up and say the same thing about the system, the exact same speech, in fact, and have a totally different level of reaction from people in the audience, both white and non-white. So in a sense, as I've said before on the program, I think, and as I've certainly said before in speeches or in my writing, the fact that a white person gets that extra credibility is in a way, indirectly and without intent, but it has the effect of furthering racism and white supremacy, just to the extent that, it allows us to have those of us who are white to have a louder microphone. So one of the things I say in my speeches, for example, and I've said it in my books as well, is that anyone hearing me, anyone reading me needs to know that the real measure of when we have eradicated racism or white supremacy, or even when we're like anywhere close to it, will be when someone of color can stand up, give the same talk, or write the same book, or write the same article, or whatever, and have people take it just as seriously as when I take it. That's the real measure of having defeated or even come close to defeating white supremacy. And I want people to know that. I want my audiences to know that. Because if they don't, then the next time a non-white person says the same thing, they'll ignore it. I want to make sure that those folks, the next time a non-white person says it, which might be the very next day after my talk or the next week, that hopefully they'll hear it. I don't know that they will or that they won't, but I hope that having heard it from me, now they'll hear it and go, oh, okay, wait, maybe I need to listen to this. Now, the fact that it took me saying it to make them feel that is totally messed up. Absolutely is evidence of racism. But if it allows that non-white person to be heard, then down the line in the long run, that could be a good thing. But in the short run, it definitely furthers, I think, it furthers racism in the short run.
What do you mean when you say criticism?
When I say criticism, I don't know. How did I use it in that last, what I said? I'm not sure what you mean.
You said it on the last show.
Oh, okay.
When you were talking about Dr. Welsing's work being pseudoscientific BS.
Oh, God, I don't know the context of my specific use of the term criticism. I mean, criticism just in general, is always valid, whether it's of my work or anyone else's work. The only thing that I think is important is that when we critique people's work, best of all possible worlds, we want to be able to point to things in the work that we think are flawed and give a reason as to why that is.
Is this what you mean by criticism, or somebody else? I want what you mean.
Well, because I don't remember the context of how I used that term, I'm not sure how to answer it. I mean, what I mean by criticism is, anytime you critique anyone's work, whether it's mine or Dr. Welsing's or Gus or Dr. Joy DeGruy, I mean, whoever it is, criticism is just critique. It's just taking issue with something someone has said. I can't recall the way that I used that word the last show, and I apologize for not remembering that, but I just can't recall.
What are some of the things you enjoy the most about being a racist white supremacist?
Well, there's nothing, honestly, that I enjoy about being racist or white supremacist. I mean, having those things internalized in me, I take no joy from them at all. There's nothing about it that I like. Now, I've asked in the past, I think you asked me a question on a previous show about what I liked about being white, and I think I as I recall that question, and what I said then was that, of course, being white, just like being male or any member of any dominant group, I'm sure I enjoy quite a bit the advantages or the benefits or the privileges that come from that, even though I realize those are awful and that they shouldn't exist. But as far as what I like about being racist or white supremacist and having internalized racist thinking and that kind of stuff, I take no joy in that at all. I mean, to me, it's a source of real constant pain, actually, and real constant discomfort. I don't like it. I don't appreciate it. In fact, as I've said before, I actually resent that the society has put that on me, has put that on my children, has put that, on my family, on people that I care deeply about. So I take no joy in that. I don't like any of that. But it's there, whether I like it or not.
You care about non-white people?
Do I care about non-white people? Absolutely. I'd like to think that I care about all people, white, non-white, whatever the case might be, this country or any other country. I absolutely care about, all people and the conditions under which they are living and the things that they're experiencing. And part of the reason that I decided to, 20 years ago or whatnot, dedicate myself to challenging racism was because I felt it was a destructive force and that it was destructive and is destructive first to non-white people, and then down the line, in the long run, destructive to all people. So I don't, as I've said before, I don't fight racism on behalf of non-white people. I don't do it as some kind of, charity work or whatnot. I do it because I think it's a destructive system. But clearly, the first victims of that system, the victims of that system in the direct sense, are non-white people. And even those of us who are white, in the long run, are hurt by it, which is something I try to argue in my writing and in my speeches. But yes, I absolutely care about the experiences of non-white people, definitely.
Then if you did care, then you should be stop mistreating non-white people.
Totally. No, I think the goal of any white person who claims to be an ally, myself included, should be to challenge racism and white supremacy both in the system and in ourselves, and to no longer create any form of injury or harm to non-white people. That is absolutely my goal as a human being, my goal as a person in this country, my goal as a white person. Now, whether I always am able to attain that goal is a different question. And as I've said on the show before, there have been times, absolutely, and I've talked about at least one that I could recall very easily, time when I did indeed engage in actions that put non-white people at risk. And that was, on my part, something for which I am to blame, and something for which I accept responsibility, and something that I don't ever want to repeat, and something that I try not to repeat. So absolutely, any person who claims to be anti-racist should try very hard. That should be part of their daily routine, to try not to injure people of color. And sometimes we will succeed, hopefully more often than not, but absolutely, I'm sure sometimes we'll drop the ball and we will act in ways that are injurious or harmful to non-white people. And when we do that, we have to apologize, we have to be accountable, we have to, try to do better next time. But it doesn't mean it won't happen, that's for sure.
So that'll be all for now.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, Justice, and Timothy. I just want to make sure I'm not saying anything incorrect. Would it be correct under the system of racism, white supremacy, would it be correct to say that white is synonymous with racist and or racism, white supremacy? Would that be accurate? If I could get a yes or no on that one, that would be great, Timothy. Well,
I would say it just slightly differently, if I can, rather than this yes or no thing.
If you could give me a yes or a no, that would be, because that's real clean. Either it's true or it's not. Is that true?
Yeah, right, but life is messy, and it's not always yes or no. I can give you a no, but then I'd like to be able to explain what I mean by the no rather than you interpret it for me.
Can I get my yes or no, and then I'll see if I want an explanation or if I want clarification.
Of course, you'll see whether you want my explanation. I'm going to tell you no, and you'll spin that however you choose. I would like to explain my
Okay, wait a minute. That's all I needed. No. Okay. Did you say that under the system of racism, white supremacy, every white person, no exceptions, is going to be trained to practice racism, white supremacy? Did you say that?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to be clear.
Do I get to explain why?
And I have one more. You were on the program in June, and you said you used whiteness as a synonym with white supremacy. Do you recall that? June 2009?
Yes, whiteness. That was my point.
Wait a minute. This is a great live demonstration for all the folks out there, and that right there. June 2009. You can rewind and listen to the program, and he just conceded. Yes, whiteness synonymous with white supremacy. White, he said no, white is not synonymous with white supremacy. Now that you can only conclude that whiteness and white are two different things. Now if you notice the individuals who use the term whiteness, a lot of them use it as though it is synonymous with white. If it's not, that's very interesting. That's what I mean about being precise with words. That's why I don't use the term whiteness on the program, and that's why I requested June 2009 that Mr. Wise not use the term whiteness. Let's just be very clear about what we're talking about. If what you mean is white supremacy, I would prefer you say white supremacy as opposed to whiteness, because that can be confusing, and I suspect a lot of non-white people, even myself from time to time when I was more confused, I would think that white and whiteness are synonymous, but you're saying that they're not. No problem. The gist of what I want to get at before I move off of this subject, I think the best thing that you could do, I think really the best thing any non-white person could do, if they're working against racism, white supremacy, which you allege to be doing, is to make sure that non-white people understand, as long as the system of racism, white supremacy exists, if you are white, you are going to be trained to be a racist. I believe you said that all white people are racist, no exceptions. Non-white people should think of them as racist, right, consciously, unconsciously, directly, and or indirectly. You just said it again, so I'm not misquoting you or putting words in your mouth that you didn't say, or that things that you're not agreeing with. Okay. Yeah. The way you give your lectures now does not do that. I think I have evidence that that's true, direct letters from individuals, and I wanted her to call in, so I'm not, fabricating correspondence with anybody. But I think there's evidence that would suggest that that's true. And my disclaimer, that's one paragraph, and I just want to read it, and you can tell me right now on the air if anything that I say in this disclaimer is incorrect or not logical, and then I want to move forward. We can discuss, because I didn't get the letter, so we can discuss that next program once I get your feedback on what you wrote. But the disclaimer for folks who didn't hear it last program, this is what I requested that Mr. Wise say every time he goes out to give a lecture. I am Tim Wise, and I am a racist white supremacist. I consciously and or unconsciously, directly and or indirectly, mistreat individuals because they are not white. If you are a non-white person and you only remember one thing that I say, remember that I, Tim Wise, am a racist white supremacist. As long as the system of racism, white supremacy exists, non-white people should suspect that the primary objective of any white person, including Tim Wise, is the maintenance of white domination worldwide. And I want to request a yes or no, just because I feel like we've talked about this a lot, and I want to get your feedback so we can have a more, it'll be a fuller discussion once I get your feedback on this.
Right. Well, I'm going to send you the full email. I'm going to send you the full email.
Please do.
The answer
is
no.
You don't think? Wait a minute. Did I say anything in that statement that is incorrect?
I think that statement is actually flawed on several levels, and in the email that I will send to you, I will explain why.
We'll discuss that next program. Thank you. That'll be a great discussion where you can explain what about that statement is flawed.
Absolutely, fantastic.
You said. I'm looking forward to it. May 30th, 6:30 p.m. Central, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. 4:30 p.m. Pacific. We'll get into our views on that disclaimer. I wanted to make sure we had clarity because it's been mentioned several times. I guess you do not agree with some aspects of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory of white genetic annihilation. I wanted you, if you could give it to us, just so we could be clear, if you could give us what your understanding is of her theory, just so we can see, if it's matching up with what we've heard from her, because she's been on the program. She's shared her theory. I want to, before we do that, though, I do want to make sure that I play and give everybody out, if they're not familiar with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she's the author of the ISIS Papers, and she's been on this program repeatedly. You check the archives. She was here Easter Sunday, in fact. The last time Timothy was with us, she was on as well. I wanted to make sure we have her credentials so that we know who we're talking about for people if they're not familiar with her work. So these are Dr. Welsing's credentials.
When he was on the program, he shared that he does not have a doctorate in anything, does not have a master's in anything, does not have any sort of knowledge about biology or what have you. Can you give us your credentials one time, just so we can be very clear about how much studying has gone into your work?
Sure.
Well, I am a graduate of Howard University Medical School. That's 4 years of study. Internship at Cook County Hospital, Chicago. That's 1 year. 3-year residency in general psychiatry at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, Washington, D.C., 2 years of fellowship at Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. in child psychiatry. And I have been a practicing psychiatrist since 1967. And I've been a professor at Howard University College of Medicine, assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics. So, I would want to put the emphasis on the fact that Mr. Wise classifies himself as white and that he states that he is a racist.
The credentials of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Timothy, if you could give us your credentials and then give us what your understanding, not where you disagree, just what your understanding is of Dr. Welsing's theory of white genetic annihilation.
Sure. Well, I mean, my credentials in terms of my understanding of the subject of racism are not related at all to my academic background. I am a political science BA from Tulane University in New Orleans, and for 20 years since that time, it's been 20 years as of this year, have been doing at the grassroots level various forms of community organizing and anti-racism work, where I have learned specifically from peoples of color, including those with credentials similar to Dr. Welsing's. And I've even learned quite a bit from Dr. Welsing, frankly, from reading her book, which I did find interesting on a number of levels, and I don't disagree with all of it by a long shot, about the system of white supremacy. I've had mentors of color in the city of New Orleans with similar credentials to Dr. Welsing and different credentials to her, who have trained me in understanding the subject, the folks at the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, Ron Chisholm, Barbara Major, et cetera, who are in any realm experts in this subject and have studied it for 20, 30, 40 years. So my credentials are the credentials of someone who has been a practitioner at the community-based level of these subjects. And I've written 5 books. They are heavily footnoted. They reference studies that are done by academics, including some from the field of psychiatry and psychology, including some from the field of sociology, including some from the field of law. All of my books are, with the exception of my memoir, are heavily footnoted and make reference specifically to academic work. So, and I've been certified by 2 different federal courts as an expert on the subject of racial discrimination. So whether that means anything or not, I don't know. But my understanding of Dr. Welsing's theory, and I say this having read the ISIS papers several years ago, having reread it recently, having heard Dr. Welsing speak on several occasions, both at Tulane when I was still a student there, I believe she came in 1987 or 88, and then also having heard her at the Fisk Race Relations Institute at least once, if not twice, in the 90s, is essentially the following, that my understanding of the Cress theory of color confrontation is that Dr. Welsing's explanation for why white folks engage in white supremacy and racism is because of a fear that in the absence of white supremacy and racism, in the absence of oppressing people of color or non-white peoples, that whites would be subject to genetic annihilation because the mixing of white and non-white produces non-white offspring. That is to say that whiteness is recessive as a genetic trait, that a very small percentage of the world's population are quote-unquote white, and that in the absence of oppression, white would be essentially subsumed or eventually overtaken and genetically annihilated by non-white peoples. That's the sort of broad contour, as I understand it, of the Cress theory. Now, under that, there's a lot of other specific claims and specific arguments, but that's the broad argument. And when I heard her make the argument at Fisk in, I believe it was 98, might have been 97, it appeared to me from, I think someone asked her a question, as I recall, and I'd have to go back and listen to the tape of her speech, but somebody asked her a question as to whether or not there might be other causes for white supremacy in addition to that one. This person who asked the question wasn't saying she was wrong, that was never a factor. that she had claimed, but that there might be other factors. And as I recall her answer, and I could be wrong in this, it's been a long time, 13 years at least, but I recall her answer suggesting that although she had once believed at one point, going back, I believe she said to the 60s, that maybe there were other causes, maybe there were economic causes. She talked about Marxist theory briefly and discussed that, that she had come to the conclusion that the factor explaining white supremacy for essentially all white people, whether they acknowledged it or not, whether it was conscious or subconscious, was this fear of genetic annihilation. And that is one aspect of the theory, the notion that it is all-encompassing, that it explains every white person's commitment to white supremacy or allegiance to white supremacy or adherence to white supremacy, that I don't think, that I believe to be an overbroad generalization and not accurate, though it doesn't take away from the fact that her theory makes sense and is true for many, and certainly for some, and I would say many white folks. I just wouldn't say that that's the underlying rationale for every white person. And then the only other aspect, and the only part of Dr. Welsing's theory that I've ever critiqued in those emails to you, as I recall, had to do with the specific aspect of the theory, and I'm not even sure if it was central to the theory, but it was something in ISIS papers, in which she talks about homosexuality as if it were not in fact a naturally occurring phenomena, at least not for non-white people, but rather something that white folks or white supremacy had essentially created as an attack on the black male. And I referred to that, as you've mentioned several times on the show, as pseudoscientific bullshit. Now, let's be clear. The reason I said that is because scientists with the same or even different and more explicit credentials than she in the field of genetics and in the field of biology, which is not her background, nor mine, but those who are have studied the subject and have said that, in fact, homosexuality is a naturally occurring biological phenomena in hundreds of species. The last time I mentioned this on your show, I think I said it was over 120. I then looked it up, and now it's over 400 species that have been observed engaging in same-sex attraction. So it is a naturally occurring phenomena. It is not something created for any purpose, let alone, as an agent of white supremacy. And at no point in ISIS, and I went back and looked, I looked for any footnote, I looked for any reference to a single study that she had ever done or that anyone else had ever done that she referenced in the book to prove or to even suggest scientifically that homosexuality was simply a tool of white supremacy, and there are none. So the reason that I called it pseudoscience is not
there are none. I just didn't understand. You said there are none. What do you mean?
There are none that she referenced. There's not a single footnote to that effect in the book that I saw. There's not a single study she referenced, yet there are hundreds of studies done not by me because, hey, I don't have the credentials and I don't claim to, and neither do you. I'm guessing you're not a PhD in psychiatry, biology, or genetics either. But those who are, those who have studied the subject and have looked at the biological and genetic basis of homosexuality have said it is occurring in hundreds of species. Now, she can say, well, that's not true, and she can say, here's my theory as to what it is, but the scientific method with which she is intimately familiar, I'm quite certain, as someone who is very well educated and has far more academic background than either you or I, she certainly knows that the scientific method, not just the white scientific method, the scientific method is based on testing hypotheses, and yet she has not done, to my knowledge, in any journal or book that she has written, any study to demonstrate the truth or the falsehood of this notion that homosexuality is a tool used to destroy black men on behalf of white supremacy. She says it. The fact that she says it doesn't make it true. That's not the scientific method in any society. So if I were to say, hey, I think that so-and-so group is inferior to this group, and I think that this group's behavior is genetically encoded. But no, I'm not going to do a study, and I'm not even going to read what other people's studies are. I'm just going to say it, and you have to accept it as true, because if you don't, it's racist. Or if you don't, it's evidence of white supremacy. Or if you don't, it's evidence that you're, making things up. I mean, it's just not an argument. So although I think the argument she makes about genetic annihilation has some kernel of truth for some white folks, I know because I've talked to some white folks who say that. But this idea about homosexuality is biologically and genetically disproven by hundreds and hundreds of studies done by biologists and geneticists, which neither I nor she nor you are. And so I have to defer to those people whose expertise is in that area. And I don't have to, but I choose to because it seems to me the most, intellectually honest way to go.
Okie dokie. Very interesting. Very interesting. I just want to point out where the letter that you referenced, portion of her theory, and I'll make that clear for listeners, as Dr. Welsing has been on this program 4 times. I have never heard her say that anyone, white or non-white, has to accept her theory. She has admitted to being a victim of white supremacy, so I'm not sure what power, or if she is even capable of making anyone accept her theory as valid. In fact, my understanding of the word theory, it pretty much means that this is my view. I could be wrong. This has not been tested. This is not accepted fact worldwide. This is just my view on what I think is happening. I think that is basically what the term theory means. I could be incorrect.
I think that's
What is your understanding of the term theory? Let's hear it. I could be incorrect.
Theory is partly what you said, but for example, the quote-unquote theory of evolution is still considered theory even though the scientific method has demonstrated its truth. So it's still called a theory because nothing, no hypothesis in the world can be totally proven or disproven 100%. That is scientifically understood by anyone who's a scientist. But even those things that are, quite frankly, proven beyond any reasonable doubt, like the process of evolution in the human species, for example, the fact that all humans come from Africa and then branched out. I mean, no one really disputes that. I mean, I guess some people do, but no, it's very much accepted as truth. It's still called a theory. So it's not just like, I mean, the only reason I'm taking a difference with what you said is it's not just, hey, this is what I think. It actually is what scientists still, like even the theory of gravity is called a theory. They can eventually call it a law, like the law of gravity or the law of thermodynamics, but there's still theories. There are individuals who disagree with the various scientific, claims in those theories. So theories aren't just beliefs. They are things that can be tested and can be proven or disproven using a scientific method to the satisfaction of most anyone looking at it. Gravity would be one of those things. Thermodynamics would be one of those things. E equals mc squared. Einstein's theory of relativity would be one of those things. Evolution would be one of those things. And so, in that sense, the C.O.W.S theory of color confrontation, which I think on many levels makes sense, could be one of those things that could be tested in the sense that we could have some type of study. And I'm not the one to design it, but it's not my theory. She could design it or someone else could design it to test the extent to which white folks' commitment or connection to white supremacy is the result of a fear of genetic annihilation. I, for one, would love to see that theory put to the test because I'm sure it's true for some. I would just argue that it's not.
Okay, hang tight. Wait a minute, Tim, because wait a minute, because we started this out just with you contesting theory. I looked it up, by the way, while you were chatting. That was all we were taking time to chat on. One of several definitions for theory, an idea used to account for a situation or justify a course of action. That's all. It doesn't say anything else, Tim.
Okay. Well, I'm using a science definition of it that scientists use all the time, but that's fine.
Where did you get your definition from?
Well, it's one that scientists use. I mean, it's in any biology.
Where did you get your definition from? Can you name the
biology
scientist?
textbook? It's in any biology
I'm sorry?
textbook. It's in any biology textbook.
So you have memorized the definition of theory according to what's in a biology textbook. Can you name a biology textbook that you've read in the past 10 years that we can look up a definition for theory?
Well, I'll tell you this. No, of course not. Because
okay.
I haven't.
Okay. Wait a minute.
In the whole discussion over evolution.
Wait a minute.
If you can find a scientist who disagrees with what I just said.
Very important. This is very important. This is very similar, in my view, pseudoscientific bullshit. That was what you called Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's work. In my view,
I said that about one
let me make sure I clarify. You said a portion, because I've been saying that consistently. So
no, actually, I heard an interview you gave with Dr. Welsing where you gave her the impression I said that about her entire theory. Actually, I listened to you say it.
Okay.
So it's not
well, let me make sure that's clear. Hence now, forever forth, because I do make errors. Can you quote me the exact program? Because I'll go back and take a listen, but I'll concede.
It was two programs ago. I was on the line waiting for you to bring me on, and you were talking to Dr. Welsing, and you were discussing this idea that I had called her theory pseudoscientific bullshit. You didn't specify the part about homosexuality, and she did not speak about that topic. She was given the impression, it seemed to me by her answer and by what you said, that I was calling her entire theory that. And I didn't say anything.
Okay. I'll make sure. Well, number one, I said I'll concede. Hey, a portion of her theory is pseudoscientific bullshit. Dr. Welsing, I read her the letter, so she heard it exactly the way you said it. Exactly the way you said it. And if you listen to that program, I know I specifically addressed the homosexuality part. If it was 2 programs ago, the clip
I just
that
heard
came
that last part where you were
talking. So you haven't heard the whole program. Okay.
No, indeed.
Thank you. Now, getting back to what I was saying. Number one, this seems very similar, your scrutiny of my explanation of theory. Well, it's not scientific. You can't name a single biology textbook that you've looked at to get your definition of theory. You can't quote any biologist that you talked to, but you, Timothy Wise, who has no background in biology, all you have is a BA in political science, not biology.
What's your background, Gus? What's your academic background?
Can I finish, please? You're interrupting.
You can finish with an answer to that question.
Can you finish? You're interrupting. Practicing racism, white supremacy, I suspect.
No, I just find it fascinating that
at any rate,
you won't
as I was saying, you're practicing racism, white supremacy, Timothy. I suspect.
Sure.
I could be wrong.
Of course, yeah, you're wrong. Go ahead.
You continue to interrupt me. And again, I want to point this out. This goes exactly to what we're talking about. The fact that you would reference any aspect of a non-white person, victim of white supremacy, the fact that you would reference any aspect of what they're doing as pseudoscientific bullshit, the fact that the way you're conducting yourself right now, interrupting me, non-white person, that right there tells me a lot about your commitment to ending white supremacy. You said on the last program, using that phrase, pseudoscientific bullshit, that was probably not the correct thing to do. It's responding in a personal manner, mean-spirited sort of way. Use the term mean specifically and use the terms personal specifically.
The word,
why?
The BS part, right? The BS part, yeah.
Why would a white person respond in a personal and mean manner to a non-white person who is attempting to counter white supremacy? Dr. Welsing's not doing anything, to my knowledge. I don't think she says anything about you specifically in the ISIS papers. I've never heard her give a presentation or a lecture where she talks about you negatively or positively.
Well, she compared me to Hitler on the show right before I came on tonight.
Can I finish, please?
Yeah,
interrupting
please.
Again. I was not done. Except when she was on this program, and that was when I asked her specific questions about you. Other than that, I've never heard her give a presentation where she had anything to say about you. What would motivate you to attack her work or any other non-white person where it's motivated by something personal and mean? Would you like to answer that question?
I would love to. Number one, whether or not she initiates any kind of criticism of me or not, once she decides to compare me to Hitler and his critique of Albert Einstein, not only is she being horribly intellectually disingenuous, but she's making a comment that makes a mockery of my own family heritage, which includes people who happen to have died in the Holocaust. So I find it not only fascinating but perverse that she would do that. But I'll leave that to the listeners to decide as to whether or not that's a legitimate thing or, you know, a cool thing for her to have done or okay thing. What I will say is that, as I said before on the show, using the term bullshit was not the term that I would have used. Now, I would still use pseudoscientific because there is a scientific method which scientists use and which hundreds of biologists and geneticists, which neither she is, nor you are, nor I am, have done, all of which demonstrate that the claim she makes about homosexuality is not scientifically valid. The fact that she is a psychiatrist doesn't speak to that. If homosexuality has been observed by geneticists and biologists, what a psychiatrist thinks about it means very little. Her time at the hospital, her time in private practice, all of which might make her an excellent psychiatrist, and I have no doubt that she is for those that she serves who are her clients and her patients, does not mean that she is an expert on the biological phenomenon of sexual attraction. None of us, neither you nor I nor she, are experts in that field. So none of us can simply say as if we know for sure. All we can do is look at what those who have studied that phenomena have said and reference their work. She, in her book, does not reference the work of any such person in making her claim. So when I claim that it's pseudoscience, that's not personal. That is a critique of the academic quality of her work, not because I say it's wrong, but because hundreds of scholars in fields that are well-credentialed to make that claim say it's wrong. That's all I'm suggesting. And so that part is not mean-spirited. What would provoke me to have said bullshit in the first email that I sent to you, a couple things about that. Number one, when I sent it to you, and I know you said, and it's perfectly legit for you to say this and to do this, as you said, you're not in the business of protecting white folks from what they say and not exposing it, and that's cool. That's fine. If you want to publish the email that was private correspondence to you, that's totally fine.
Wait a minute. Hang on. Is that written anywhere in any of the correspondence I've ever had with you via email? Have you ever written anything where you indicated this is a private email? Just yes
no, Gus.
Oh,
I'm not trying to suggest you did anything wrong. I'm not trying to suggest you did anything
you
wrong.
You do. That's not true, and
No.
I want to stop right there. That's not true, because the fact that you would even mention the term private as though it suggests I did something incorrect. This was just you and I talking in confidence, and I
don't mean to.
Totally suggest that, and I suspect that you're practicing racism right there. Last program, you brought that in. You weren't even talking to me. You were talking to Justice, and you said that was a private correspondence. I didn't say that publicly. Just that right there, the connotations of the term private. This is someone who can charge up to $6,000 to use his words publicly. I suspect you know the connotations of using the term private. I strongly suspect you're practicing white supremacy right there, and even when you brought up the term private. Please continue.
Two things. Number one, you would suspect if I woke up in the morning and drew breath that I was practicing white supremacy in the process of doing it. So that doesn't mean very much. Number two, the simple fact is that if, as you say, I charge money for my talks, I've written 5 books, I've given thousands of speeches in the last 20 years.
You gotta hang tight, because I can't believe you just said that. Or I should believe it, because you are an admitted racist, white supremacist.
But you're not going to let me answer your point. See, that's
because you said something that is incorrect. You said something that should never be said by anyone who alleges to be sincere about replacing white supremacy with justice. You said the fact that I would suspect you of being a racist doesn't mean anything. We can stop. That right there should never be said. Okay. You're absolutely correct. Even if you did wake up tomorrow and you were breathing air, I would suspect Timothy Wise, racist, white supremacist. He is an admitted racist. We're still in a system of white supremacy. It's correct for me to do so. That is not something that should be taken lightly. That is something that should never be minimized, joked about, said in any way that would suggest it really shouldn't mean anything that he suspects Tim Wise of being racist, regardless of what he does. If anything,
I said that, Gus.
We should. You're interrupting again, because you didn't. You just took it away. I hope everyone, you said non-white people can listen and decide for themselves. Really think about that. It should never be said. It should never be implied, joked about, even suggested or hinted at that it doesn't really mean anything that you suspect Tim Wise is a racist. No, it means a whole lot. Your conduct on this program consistently demonstrates that. Chalk that. That's another suspected act of conscious racism. For you to even imply that doesn't mean anything that you suspect me of being a racist.
Gus, am I going to get to answer the question or not? Am I going to get to make my point or not?
Make your point, please.
Well, I was. Now you've interrupted me, and it's hard to even remember exactly.
You interrupted me a lot, too, so we're even. You've interrupted me a lot today, too.
I understand that. But if you really want clarity as to where I'm coming from, and you want your audience to have it, as opposed to suggesting that you know it, in which case, why continue to have me on? It seems to me you could just spend your 2 hours talking about me, talking about, how dishonest I am, replaying old clips and saying them however you want, suggesting that I believe one thing when I believe another, and leave it at that. But here's the thing that I was trying to get at. If we are going to start with the assumption that I am, by virtue of what I just said a second ago regarding private conversation, am engaging in white supremacy with regard to, let's say, the whole discussion about Dr. Welsing. What I was trying to get at was this. in the 20 years that I've done this work, and I first heard of Dr. Welsing's work when I was still in college, before I even began really down the path of even trying to do anti-racism work. It was 87, maybe 88. It was Tulane University in New Orleans. And after that point, a few years later, I read the ISIS papers and then saw her speak again, like I said, in 97 or 98. At no point in that 20 years of me giving speeches have I ever said anything against Dr. Welsing or against the Kress theory of color confrontation. Not once. Not once in all the articles that I've written, 250-plus articles that are all out there, easily checkable, have I ever said one thing about Dr. Welsing, critical or salutary, just nothing. I did not talk about her in my book. So if I was someone who was dedicated to tearing her down or to somehow attacking her theory publicly, and I realize I'm not saying that you did anything wrong by sharing the email. I'm simply saying that I've never made those points publicly because I've never felt like that was an important or necessary thing for me to do. And frankly, it has always been my belief that I have bigger, things that I've got to deal with as a white, aspiring anti-racist ally. I am primarily concerned with dealing with white supremacists and white folks thinking around race and challenging that. The fact that I might have some disagreements with a non-white person, whether it's Dr. Welsing or anyone else, seems to me every second that I spend attacking that person in some public way, and I've been asked to do it, don't get me wrong. I've had people ask me at speeches. I've had people write to me emails and ask me to write articles attacking Dr. Welsing or attacking lots of people, attacking Louis Farrakhan, attacking Jeremiah Wright, attacking this, that, and the other. Any black person they don't like, they've asked me, why don't you ever write about that? And frankly, the reason is, A, I don't disagree with those people in many cases, and B, even in those areas where I do disagree, I don't feel it is the place or the point or a logical use of my time as a white person to attack people of color publicly for the things that I might disagree with them on, especially when there's lots I do agree with them on, and when I think my job as a white person, whether you believe it or not, or whether anyone else believes it, my job as a white person is to be dealing with white folks. That is what the folks in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, again, we're celebrating 50-year anniversary of them this April, told white folks to do in 67. That's what Stokely Carmichael, that's what H. Rap Brown, that's what black folks told white folks you need to do, is get out there and challenge your people. And I take that literally and seriously. So what I said to you, I think it was probably the first time, other than maybe one or two posts on a chat board where I just said, there are things I disagree with Dr. Welsing about and things I agree with. I think it's probably the first time that I ever said anything in any way against Dr. Welsing's theory or even that one little part of it that I think is pseudoscience. So it seems to me if I was really about tearing her down, I would have been doing that for years, and that's just not my thing. I'm not real interested in making her the issue. I mean, to me, that's not, she's not the problem.
I don't think I ever, or I'm not aware of anyone, myself or anyone else, who said Tim Wise is dedicated to tearing down Dr. Welsing. I don't think I've ever said that, and I've never heard anyone say that. The question that was asked was, what would motivate you to respond in a personal and mean manner to what any non-white person has to say about white supremacy? And let's not be slick. Let's not practice racism consciously or unconsciously, because that response was not to Dr. Welsing saying that you calling her work or a portion of her theory pseudoscientific bullshit is comparable to what happened to Albert Einstein during World War II, the way he was discredited by racist white supremacist Nazis. Your calling her pseudoscientific, calling a portion of her work pseudoscientific bullshit wasn't in response to that. That she made that comment after you made your statement. So why would you respond in a personal and mean manner to Dr. Welsing or any victim of white supremacy?
I would imagine it is for the same reason that I would respond on occasion that way, in a way that uses a word, let's say in this case the word bullshit, that I don't think I should have used, the same way that I would have used that word and have used that word to critique the various and assorted white supremacists who write to me every hour on the hour trying to, quote-unquote, prove to me that black people are intellectually inferior. And I respond to them, frankly, a lot more viciously, so it's the same phenomena. Do I occasionally respond to people with whom I disagree in language that in retrospect I think, That's probably not the language I should have used, of course, because I'm human like everybody else. We do that. All of us have done that, and it doesn't mean that we're proud of it, and it doesn't mean we want to do it again. And so instead, I try now when I'm responding, whether it would be to Dr. Welsing or whether it would be to some white supremacist who's trying to prove the genetic superiority of the white race, I would respond to them perhaps by using that term pseudoscience, to be sure, but not using the pejorative term bullshit as I use. And I'm trying not to use that with anybody because I think it's not kind. But I've done it on occasions, and more occasions than not, to white folks who write to me far more often than I've ever done that in reference to any non-white person. So it's not like something I specifically held out for her or for a non-white person. It is a human frailty that all people have, and I exercise it on occasion with people, be they white or non-white. And that's not something that I'm proud of, but it's something that's true.
As a white person who alleges, as an admitted racist white supremacist who alleges to be working to replace white supremacy with justice, I would think with regards to non-white people, whatever they have to say, if they say, I hate every white person and I don't want to talk to any white person, I think we should be totally separated forever. If that's the position that they take, if they take the position that Dr. Welsing's theory is correct, and I'm going with her 1,000%, if they take the position that, I agree with a portion, not so much others, whatever, the victim of white supremacy, whatever their stance is, it really should be totally irrelevant. I mean, 100% of the time, not 90, not 95, 100% of the time. I find it fascinating that you would have responded that way, even in private, to me, just sending me an email or what have you, bringing that up. I think I have said on this program more than once, there are things Dr. Welsing and I don't agree about. It's not like I'm here saying I agree with 1,000% of what she has to say. Go get the ISIS papers today and memorize every page. I don't think I've ever said that. I don't think I've taken that position. I think I've said consistently there's no non-white person that I have 100% agreement with. So I don't know why you would even be motivated to tell that to me in a private email, that you think a portion of her work is pseudoscientific bullshit. I just don't understand what that's relevant to at all, why you would bring that up at all, much less the phrasing that was used, and you said coming from a personal and mean response. I don't understand any of that unless it was motivated by racism, white supremacy. That makes sense, but that does not make sense to me. Well, I don't know. Do you have a better explanation for why white people practice racism, white supremacy?
Well, I have an explanation for why I did what I did by using the phraseology. It's not one that you're necessarily going to accept, or it may not be better, but it is what it is. And that is that when a person, whether it's me or anyone else, whether it's a white person or a non-white person, is confronted with an argument that they believe to be significantly flawed, they will have opinions about it, and they may well share those opinions. Now, you may say, and I understand this would be a legit critique, that you had not raised the issue, and I have to go back and look at the email, but you had not specifically raised the issue of homosexuality, so why would I even get into that? I can't recall how that all went down, but we can look back at those emails, and I'll be happy to do it, and you can too. What struck me from the very first or maybe the second time that I was on your program was that it seemed to me there was a significant extent to which the verbiage that you chose, the wording that you chose, the precision with which you seemed to want certain words to be used in certain order, seemed to be so much of a mimicry of Dr. Welsing's wording that it struck me that you were, in fact, parroting her line, whether or not there were things you disagreed with her about, not one of which, by the way, I've ever heard you publicly explain what it is you disagree with her about, that you say there are things. I haven't heard that. I'm sure there may be, but I've never heard you say it. So it seemed to me, and it even extends to the last program where I was asked by Justice, I believe, though it may have been by you, I think it was by Justice, to talk about white supremacy in the following areas of people activity, and then either Justice or you named the several areas. These are all literally verbatim from Dr. Welsing's work. So it struck me at the time
I'm stopping you here because that's not accurate. It is not accurate. That is, in terms of saying victim of white supremacy and all areas of people activity, the person who is most responsible for that would be Neely Fuller Jr. And Dr. Welsing even acknowledges that in her book, very first page. So if anyone, I would think it would be Mr. Fuller. He's actually been on this program 8 times to Dr. Welsing's 4. So I would think if it's anyone I'm accused of parroting, it would be Mr. Fuller, not Dr. Welsing, because the verbiage and what have you, and she would, as I said, she would even concede, and I think she said so on the program, that's Mr. Fuller. So that is not correct.
That's true. She does credit Dr. Fuller for the wording. You're right. And so, but
and you've read both of their works. Is that true?
Oh, I have indeed. And I think I've mentioned to you on your program before that I have on many occasions referenced Dr. Fuller's work and quoted it, and giving him credit, of course, because I think that the line in particular, and I'm going to paraphrase it here only because I haven't memorized it, but I'm sure you know what I'm getting at. It's the line about unless you understand white supremacy, everything else will only confuse you. I know it's a longer quote than that, but that's the paraphrase. I think that is really a brilliant statement, and I think it's one that is absolutely true when we try to talk about anything. If we're talking about why the schools don't work, quote unquote, or why people don't have jobs, and why the war on drugs is not really helping with the drug problem. If you don't understand white supremacy, if you do understand white supremacy, you know why those things don't work, quote unquote. You know why the schools don't get better. I think he's totally right on that, and I've quoted him, and I've tried to, in fact, steer people towards his work because of that, because I think it's valuable.
Okay. Well, that's another thing I would like to check on and the people, I wanted to make sure I got at least 1 or 2 calls before we wrap things up. Your line is open, so if you could keep the noise down in the background, I'll go down 1, 2, 3 down the call list. But I have heard you speak publicly. I've never heard you reference Mr. Fuller's work, and I will be curious to ask other non-white people who've heard you speak publicly if they have ever heard you reference Mr. Fuller's work. But I'm still confused as to why, even if that was true, even if it was Dr. Welsing that we were just here parroting word for word what she has to say, I still don't understand why that would provoke a personal and mean response, particularly to a non-white person with your understanding of racism, white supremacy. I want to make sure I double-check the folks who called in. Mr. Nero, if you're there and you have a question for Mr. Wise, please go right ahead.
Yes, I am. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Mr. Wise, I attended your lecture at Sacramento State University.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please share with me what you discussed in the first 15 minutes of your lecture?
Oh, boy. I can't necessarily recall what the first 15 were. I would imagine, I'm trying to remember the speech, and it was last week, and, they're similar, but they're not always the same. I would assume, I know that the first 7 minutes, 8 minutes, was talking about the difference between guilt and responsibility. And so I told a story about, from my own personal experience, about being in New Orleans. And without boring folks, it was a story about living in a house with 9 other people, and having one of the members of our house leave a pot of food out on the stove for like 2.5 days, and nobody cleaned it. And the guy that made the mess, he didn't clean it. And finally, I decided it needed to be cleaned, even though I hadn't caused the problem. And it was a metaphor that I was using for racism, the idea being that even though white folks today may have not created the system, it's been around since before we were alive, we still have a responsibility to clean up that problem, to clean up that mess, to deal with that problem. So that's the first 7-8 minutes, depending on how long it takes me. And then I get into like specifics about right now, sort of, what's going on, what the legacy of white supremacy has been in terms of inequality, wealth disparities between white and non-white people, et cetera. And all that takes me about 15 minutes, as I recall.
Okay. Do you recall how many times you used the word fair?
I don't.
Okay, let me refresh your memory. You used fairness once. You used the term fair 7 times, and you used unfair twice.
Okay, I'd have to know where I did that to know what it's about. I don't know.
Well, all throughout. Your lecture was pretty much, laden with the term fair and its, many expressions there.
Well, what did I say specifically using the term? Do you recall?
No, but what I did was I just jotted down every time I heard the word fair. I just, wrote fair times 1 plus 1 plus whatever, until I got, the numbers that I just gave you. So I just like I said, I heard fair 7 times, unfair twice, and fairness once. And I heard whiteness 4 times. And I did not feel that your lecture does anything to replace the system of white supremacy with justice or anything else for that matter. And I saw non-white people in attendance at the lecture. There were a significant number of black people there. I'm not going to say many, but several of which were with white people, as would appear to be a sexual partner. There seemed to be many in attendance. You did not touch on. I didn't hear you at all mention anything about suspecting white people. I didn't hear you mention anything at all regarding sex.
Mr. Fuller? Did he mention Mr. Fuller's work?
No, not at all. He did not mention.
No,
Mr.
I did
Fuller.
Not in that speech. You're right. But I find it fascinating that you can look at people in an audience and make the assumption that they are sexual partners. I mean, that is just amazing to me. The fact that a person of color and a white person could be sitting next to each other as friends and not as sexual partners seems to not cross your mind. I mean, it's just fascinating. I didn't see anyone hanging on anyone in that audience. I'm now picturing the room. I know I've got a video of this coming, and I will make sure to look at it to determine what it is I said and didn't say. I do know one thing that I said. It's near the end of the speech, and if you were there for the whole time, you must have heard it as well. One of the sections in that talk, near the very end, because it's part of it's part of the book that I have coming out this week, is the part where I specifically say that the research on this subject has determined that essentially every single white person, and the only reason I said essentially is because I'm referencing the studies and they say like 95%. To me, that's as good as everybody, but I was trying to be precise with what the studies say, that essentially every single white person, and even a large number of non-white people, have internalized the notions of white supremacy. It's been studied. It's been demonstrated that there is anti-black, pro-white bias. I reference those studies specifically in the speech. They are referenced specifically in my book. So, in fact, I did say that, and I spent a significant amount of time saying that the only way that we can ever hope to address racism and white supremacy is for white folks to own that, to put that on the table, to acknowledge that that is who we are. And I said we in the corporate sense. I didn't say for you to acknowledge that's who you are, white people. I said we, and that is on the tape, that is in the speech, and it was in every speech that I gave that week and every speech I've given for the last month that I've been working on this new book and talking about the findings in this new book. I say it every time, and I said it in that speech. So how anyone could walk away from that with the belief that I had not said that white folks are racist, how they could go away thinking that any substantial number, if any white people, I mean, I even said, look, the 95% is not even everybody, but probably all of us. I said all of us have internalized this. It's part of who every one of us happens to be. And I said it at least once, if not several times in the talk. Nobody could have walked away from that talk and not heard that. I mean, I guess they could if they weren't listening, but I said it. And I can only be responsible for what I say. It was said explicitly in that talk on several occasions. You're right. I didn't talk about sex. You're right. I didn't. That wasn't part of my talk, but I did not see anyone in that audience who seemed to be hanging on a partner who was white, who happened to be of color, as if somehow, I mean, it's fascinating to me that is something anyone could interpret from looking at an audience of 1,500 people. But
may I respond, please?
Please.
From where I sat, and the reason why I asked you about the first 15 minutes is because I got there a little late.
Okay.
And so I want to make sure that when I came in, you were talking about the gumbo on the stove.
Right.
So I just want to know if I missed anything.
From
where I sat, because I got there late, I had to sit in the back to your left.
Right.
And from where I sat, there were 3 couples in front of me within the next 3 rows. hugged up the entire time or holding hands the entire time, leaning heads on shoulders the entire time. Now, I don't know of friends that behave this way. Typically, when I see males and females hugged up like this, I assume they're a little bit more than friends. That's where I'm getting, that information from what I observed while I was there. Not only did I observe that, but I observed non-white people and white people rush to their feet to give you a standing ovation, of which myself and 3 others did not even clap for the things that you said, because nothing you said, in my opinion, is geared towards replacing white supremacy with justice. Yeah, those things that you mentioned, you said those things. You highlighted what's going on, and people got, a gist of certain aspects of things. And yes, you gave some statistics and some data that probably non-white people weren't aware of. But that does not replace the system. All that did, from what I observed, is garner a great deal of affection for you, Mr. Wise, because you gave a great performance. And one of the non-white women that got up and asked you a question, even I believe she said, I may need to be rescued from this next statement, but I thought she said, I love what you said today, Mr. Wise. I thought she said, I loved what you said. Do you remember the lady that?
Remember it. I don't remember, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I mean, it could have happened. I don't know.
And like I said, I may need to be rescued from that statement. But from what I saw, afterwards, they lined up to have you autograph their book. No one suspected you or any other white person for that matter. It almost seemed like we were at Woodstock or something in regards to race. Like this was some great big party now that suggested that white people and black people are on the same page for once, and that the white people here are going to do their best to end racism.
Right.
To me, that's what I saw.
Okay. That I appreciate you sharing that. Let me just share one thing, and then Gus, I'm going to have to go because I committed to 2 hours and we're over that now. But I do need to go. But I do want to say this. I appreciate you sharing your interpretation of the talk and what you saw and everything else. I only want to say one thing. During that time that folks were coming up in the book line afterward, I can only tell you about one thing I was told, and that was by a woman of color who is a professor. And I don't recall whether she's a professor there or at another institution, because there were folks who came over from some other schools. And this individual told me, for example, that she uses my book, my first book, White Like Me, in her classes. She teaches a class that deals specifically with race and with racism and ethnicity issues and all this other stuff. And she teaches a class that's mostly white young people, white students. And she talked about using my book in her class. And she said, before I was using your book, I was finding it extremely difficult to have any kind of conversation with these mostly white folks in this room. They were not listening to the subject. They would turn off. They would tune out. They would absolutely ignore the subject. And she was finding it, according to what she told me, difficult to make progress in her professional capacity to get through to them. And she said, this year, I think it was this year, maybe last year, she said, I started teaching this book, and I found that it gave me an entree to then, after we finish your book, it wasn't just your book, but after we finished your book, it opened those students up enough to where I could then hit them with the information that I wanted to hit them with from scholars of color, from academics of color, from writers of color, and they began to be more open to that. Now, all I can say in that situation is if that's true, and I'm assuming she's telling the truth, on the one hand, it's terribly horrible that it would take my work, whether it's a speech or a book, to have that effect. But if that's true, if that's happening, then the question is that helpful or not? And I would say it's helpful, but I don't know. I mean, that seems like a legitimate thing to ask.
Mr. Wise, the people I saw come up to you were fawning all over you. I mean, if you had I'm gonna remember that Justice is on the show. But if you were not a married man, believe me, you would not sleep alone that night at Sacramento State. I mean, that's how many women I saw line up just to touch your robe.
Brother.
I think that'll be a nice spot where we can end on. We can pick back up there May 30th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Central, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. That would be another individual, totally different state, who saw the exact same thing I did, with the exact same comparison. How about that? May 30th, 6:30 p.m. Central. Is that correct, Mr. Wise?
That sounds good, and I will send you this email so you'll have that well in advance of that.
Please do. I look forward to discussing it further.
All right, sounds good.
Outstanding. Thank you. We'll see you next month.
All right.
Be just, man. Be just.
Right, take care. Take care.
Yes, sir. Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade, Justice, and Timothy. I think, or I strongly suspect, I should have got back to Justice because I suspect she had more questions. My apologies. Timothy got a little rowdy today, which is good. I'm glad non-white people heard that, and I hope non-white people, if you're listening, really think about that. I don't believe if it's a white person and they're really interested in ending racism, white supremacy, I just don't think they should be getting angry with a non-white person for any reason. I don't care if every aspect of their theory is pseudoscientific bullshit. He didn't say that. He said a portion. But I wouldn't care if everything they said was pseudoscientific bullshit. I just don't think there's any reason a white person should be responding as though they're personally upset, mad, mean, in any way about something a non-white person is doing. And I want, highlight, when he was explaining that about Dr. Welsing, he said he responds in the same way he would respond to a white supremacist. That, to me, was fascinating, that he would compare his response to Dr. Welsing, an admitted victim of white supremacy. He would respond to her in the same way he would respond to a white supremacist. Fascinating. 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 Justice, I'll go, again, my apologies. I suspect she had more questions. We'll make sure to start with you next time so you can get any questions that we missed today and new questions for the May 30th program. Did you have anything you wanted to share, or if I missed out and you didn't ask some great questions?
Can you please repeat that one more time?
I said, did you want to share anything, or if you had any questions that I neglected to get back to you so you could ask more questions, if you wanted to share any cool questions that you had that you didn't get to ask, or if you had anything else you wanted to share?
I had like 6 more questions for Timothy Wise. Do you want me to share them?
It's up to you. If you would like to save them, like you can start with them next time he comes on May 30th. You can start with those 6 questions if you want to save them, or if you want to share them with folks now.
Oh, never mind. It's okay. I don't want to share them right now. I'll share them on the next show. There
you go. Any thoughts? I don't know if you took notes today or not. Do you have any thoughts on Timothy's conduct today on the program, things he said or the way he behaved today?
He did sound angry. And like when he was interrupting you, he stopped and then he and then he tried to like fake it out, like he was trying to like, I didn't do anything wrong. And yeah.
I noted that too. He seemed angry at several points today. He seems more angry today than other times that I've heard him on the program. I don't know. How did you feel? Did you think he sounded, particularly angry today, or?
Yeah, and I was going to ask him that too. I was going to ask him, are you getting angry? And yeah, that's it.
That'll be a good one to ask him when he comes on the program next time. Yeah, that was very interesting. And I want to point that out. I did not request today. That's why, folks, if this is your first time listening to the context of white supremacy, I have requested to be able to interject a certain number of times per program when Mr. Wise is here, because sometimes he will say things that I think are important that need to be highlighted. Like today when he said that it doesn't mean anything that you would suspect me of being a racist, whatever I did, which is true, and that is the logical and correct thing for a non-white person to do in a system of white supremacy. But I have requested that and have been doing that since he was on the program in February. So when I did the sound effects to interject, that's something that he has been acceptable with. He's never raised issue with. I've been doing that for at least the last 3 times he's been on the program. So that's not me being rude. We've already agreed that this is something that I should be able to do when he's on the show if I think he's doing something to practice racism that needs to be pointed out. But yeah, I did think he was quite a bit agitated today, which I'm glad non-white people got to hear. I think that's constructive. I don't think he had any reason to get angry. He's a white person and an admitted racist. I am a black male, double whammy, victim of white supremacy. I just don't think there's any reason he should be getting angry and yelling and doing a lot of interrupting or any of the other things he was doing on the program. Or Dr. Welsing referencing a portion of her work as pseudoscientific bullshit. I don't see any justification for that except practicing racism, white supremacy. I don't know, but he explained that. Folks listening in, you can come to your own conclusion about that. The email address. You want to make sure you give out your email address, Justice?
justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com.
Groovy. I think Mr. Nero is with us. A person called in at 513 and someone, I believe, called in at 111. You're all there if you would like to make a comment or what have you before we wrap the program up.
This is Mr. Nero. I just want to also say that I felt that Mr. Wise was hostile, combative, and argumentative. And Justice, I hope I did not offend you at all today. I was a little heated because of what I saw at the at that so-called lecture, which I call a performance, because that's what he gives. He gives a great performance, tells great stories. I mean, I even found myself chuckling a couple of times at some of the stories. And I'm going, and I know he's a racist, so I'm saying to myself, man, he's really good. He is really good at telling these stories and, and getting people involved in the stories. But at the end of the day, it doesn't replace anything. In fact, I suspect that one of his hidden agendas is to push this homosexual lifestyle or to condone it and say, hey, this is normal, and we all should just respect the fact that this is here and not have any reservations about it. I mean, I really suspect he's more interested in that than anything else.
I agree 100% with that. But I think Dr. Welsing said that he's looking for a place where he can actually advertise his work. And by him debating you back and forth, knowing that he keep using the word fair over and over again, I think he's actually enjoying doing this to keep this going, argumentative of trying to confuse the people. And then when you were actually asking him a question about confusing black people, he kept saying, well, it's not my, I hope I'm not actually engaging, telling black people that they're confused, but if my performance is so good, then I can't help that. See, he's enjoying doing this to black people, I think.
I suspect that is the case as well. I suspect that's his objective with his talks, is to spread confusion. I suspect that is his conscious objective. That is his intent, is to spread this confusion to non-white people. I think he's very aware. He has eyes and he has a much better understanding of racism, white supremacy than I do. So I'm quite certain he understands what's happening when these non-white people run up to him when the performance is over and, are scratching and clawing him to get an autograph and a hug and everything else. I'm quite certain that he's aware of what's going on. I could be incorrect, but, and I guess the thing I would point out is that I suspect Dr. Wells, she pointed out that concern. She said from the very beginning, I don't think it would be constructive to have him on the program. It's just giving him an opportunity to spread confusion, promote his work, practice white supremacy. And I think that is a valid concern. However, I think a significant number of non-white people could listen to this broadcast, and even if they just hear one, I think a significant number would hear this and lose a bit of their confusion with regards to Mr. Wise. I've seen it have the fact that even Mia Cunningham, the fact that happened, that she went and heard him speak and was excited about him, and she listened to, I think, just one program when he was here last time, and seemed like she changed her view of him and actually went out to try to get other non-white people to listen and let them know, hey, this guy's a racist. I think he tricked us. The fact that happened, I suspect there could be a constructive value to the program. I would like that number to be very, very high. I know it's not, but the fact that is happening at all, constructive, and hopefully we'll take advantage of the last 3 shows we have with him to make it more constructive so that more non-white listeners tuning in would think, hey, this guy, I don't think he's a white ally. I think this guy's trying to continue the refinement of white supremacy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right on that point, but on the other point of what Mr. Cunningham said was he is trying to win over the gays, and if he gets them on his team, there's going to be a lot of, as we got the whole media thing with the black people, a lot of young black youth are over-sexualized with the media and the whole gay thing. I think he's trying to win over that group and say, I got Dr. Wellesley on this point, and watch me win over the people with the whole gay thing. I think he's setting himself up for that whole debate, and that's what he's trying to focus on. That's why he's trying to just narrow his point down to, look, this is where I can get you on to confuse the people.
And let me also just say this as well. I would not be surprised one bit if President Barack Obama appointed Tim Wise as some type of, race liaison or some, so gives him some special title to go out and discuss, racism and white supremacy and get paid well for doing it. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, it almost makes sense now that he's did he say he was a political major in college?
Political science.
Political science major? Yeah, well, that made a lot of sense to me after hearing him speak. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he gets appointed some type of, title from the government to go out and do this so-called anti-racist work. That would not shock me at all. And this other term he used at the conference, LGBT. I guess. I'm sorry, what was that?
I was just going to say, I think he said that he got some sort of special appointment or title or recognition as being an expert on racism from a white person. I think he said a judge. I don't remember the exact title, but he shared that today, that he has been recognized as being an expert on racism. I think he said he got 2 of those titles. He said it earlier today. You can rewind and get the particulars.
Wow. Gus, were you able to listen to? I sent you some audio files. Were you able to listen to those audio files that I emailed?
I did get I got the audio files. I was not able to listen to all of it, but I did start. Yes, I started.
No, I just wanted to make sure they worked. Okay.
Oh yeah, yes sir.
Yeah, I wasn't thoroughly. Sure
I thoroughly appreciated it, and I was surfing for sound clips that I could use in the broadcast. That's another thing that I'm a little bit surprised about, that someone had said before it would be impossible, or they didn't think it would be a constructive value to making an effort to police Tim Wise when he goes out to speak, to see if it matches up with what he said on the program. And I that was never my intent. This has just, been collateral damage as a result of having him here repeatedly, is that it has happened where people have either heard the program and then been able to go out and see him, or they saw him and then they were able to come hear the program, and they have noted the discrepancy in the way that he speaks about racism and his conduct in general. They've noted that discrepancy, and it has helped them gain a higher level of suspicion for white people in general and Tim Wise specifically. So I think that has been definitely constructive. I hope that happens on a larger scale. I found his speaking engagements. I want to give those out so that can continue to happen, because I think that would be great, particularly if non-white people, you can attempt to counter racism. If you're able to hear him speak, go and challenge him, question him, have some questions in mind, and just go. He normally has a Q&A session. Ask questions, challenge him, and try to get him to slip up and, or practice racism. Slip up and be racist in front of everybody, or get him to speak truthfully about white supremacy. He's going to be, Worcester, Massachusetts at Assumption College on April 30th. He'll be at the University of California, Davis on May 5th. He'll be in Pomona, California on May the 12th. He'll be, I don't know anyone. He'll be at Western Illinois University in Macomb, Illinois on May 18th. He'll be at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in American Higher Education, NCORE. He'll be at that. That's June the 1st through the 5th, so that's after the program. But those are the dates, the few that I gave. That's where he'll be between now and May 30th. If he comes to your town, if you have an opportunity to check him out, please go and ask questions. I think that would be great. Or if you just go and pay attention to what he said. I thought that was beautiful. I was applauding in the background when you noted the number of times that he said fair. And I think someone said that they suspect he's doing that consciously, just as just a real ugly in your face example of racism, white supremacy. And I suspect, because that was like the first thing he said today on the program. I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "Oh, I'm doing fairly well." I think that was what he said, fairly well. I think it's laughable. It really is. It's laughable. It's like having someone just, be really sly about rubbing the fact that they're racist white supremacists in your face. But I thought that was beautiful, just counting the number of times that he said fair at the presentation where you saw him.
Yeah, absolutely. And in regards to the questions, I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but the way they had it structured, he only took 5 questions, and the 5 questions came from some panel on the from the school that they had asked the questions ahead of time and had them all written out. So they didn't take any questions from the audience. They had the 5 people lined, I guess ready to go, and when it was time to take the questions. So I don't know how much input he had in that, if any at all. So, but they did not allow any questions from the general audience.
That's interesting. Wow. He the time that I saw him here in Washington State, they did, I think, allow for a brief Q&A from the audience, where some non-white people that I was with who were less confused, they did get an opportunity to ask questions, and that was real interesting. But yeah, if you can get in one of those, man, take advantage. If you can't, I guess just make a note of that, because that's interesting. If they control who gets to ask questions, that's interesting too. But yeah, Mr. Timothy is slick, man. Timothy is slick. One of the more refined racists that I know of. I think even that is a great tactic for white people when they get offended, like you've done something wrong. Like, they know that a significant number of non-white people they'll shift with that automatically. Like even if the white person is doing something incorrect, just them acting as though they have been injured, that, the non-white person has done something wrong to them, a ton of non-white people will, oh my gosh, that defense mechanism will kick in, defend white person, defend white person, defend white person. That's Jesus there. Can't let anything happen to him. I suspect that's a huge conscious tactic of racism, white supremacy, when he does his thing where he's been wronged somehow by saying he's a racist, or calling him Timothy. That was one issue before. Saying known as Tim Wise. He took huge issue with that. Even saying, you're making it sound like I said all aspects of her theory were pseudoscientific bullshit, and it was just a portion. Just little things like that to try and make it seem like, he's the victim. He's the one that's being mistreated here. Real slick tactic, I suspect.
Oh, yes, that's exactly what I heard, too, and that's exactly what I think he's trying to emulate when he comes on your show, is to actually have the people that actually view it seem like you actually beating up on him, and he's just trying to help black people in the system of racism and white supremacy. And then when at the end of the show, he always ends it off with, I'm just doing the best I can by making up a profit talking about being a racist, which is, I don't know, he's very confusing.
Purposely, I suspect. Purposely. And anybody, if you're listening new, I suspect this would have to sound real crazy. I'm just not aware of other non-white people who challenged Tim Wise publicly. So I suspect if you're listening the first time, this might sound a little wacky. I would suggest go back and listen to some of the previous programs. Not only with Mr. Wise, this was his 5th appearance here. Not only, just digging back to listen to our exchanges, but go back and check out some of the other programs. That way you can get a feel for my view on racism, white supremacy, and why the programs with Timothy sound the way that they do. I think if you listen to other programs with Mr. Wise, I think you will note inconsistencies in his behavior and interesting consistencies. The term fair will be one of the consistencies that should jump out. But yeah, just noting different inconsistencies in his conduct on the program and things that he'll say. He'll say it this way this time, this way next time. Very interesting. And then if you listen to other programs where Mr. Wise is not here, Timothy, I think you can note the consistency in terms of my views and the consistency with which the guests that come on the program tend to at least say, hey, I think what you're saying is logical and makes sense. I think that's a trend that you'll note. As crazy as it might sound, and as Mr. Wise might try and say about different non-white people that, portions of what they think are bullshit, I think you'll note that a lot of the people that have come here have said that it's very logical, very rational, my view on racism, white supremacy, and why I think non-white people should conduct themselves with a high level of suspicion with regards to white people. I could be incorrect, but, check out the programs, come to your own conclusion. But to definitely turn your listening up into high gear with Mr. Wise. You got to be real careful. He is very slick with words, Even just something as subtle as that today when he said, in June, when he was on the program, he said that whiteness, he uses it as a synonym with white supremacy. He does not think white is synonymous with white supremacy. Even that is real interesting, specifically given the fact that he, freely acknowledged all white people, yes, are going to be racist in a system of white supremacy. I don't know how you can concede that and then have an issue with saying that white is synonymous with white supremacy, but he did, and hopefully we'll get more explanation on that next program, May 30th. Guess anybody have any final comments that they wanted to share before we get ready to wrap up?
Good show.
No, I'm fine. I think I got it all out.
Well, I guess let me ask you a question. You saw him live, De Niro. I think Dr. Welsing myself, Back of the Bus, and I think some other non-white people have been saying consistently that to really get the full effect of the damage and skill that Tim Wise has, you got to see him in person. Was that your experience? Because you've heard him quite a few times here now, and then you got to see him in person.
Absolutely. I mean, afterwards, I just sat around and watched, just observed the people. And like I said, I saw them just fawning all over him. You know, especially the non-white females. I mean, I was almost jealous.
Are you pulling? Because he seems to imply that we're, making this up, and it doesn't really look like that. You all are just exaggerating more of your Negro bullshit. Are you exaggerating?
And if I'm Tim Wise's wife, I'd be highly suspicious that he's on the road having affairs. Highly suspicious if I was his wife. And you know what I mean? If I'm a woman and I'm married to Tim Wise, I'd be so suspicious it ain't even funny.
Wow.
On every campus, at least one on every campus. And I'm not talking about no average looking non-white female. I'm talking about, cream of the crop.
Oh man.
And however he wants it, whatever flavor he wants. If he likes them dark, if he likes a red bone, he likes it tall or short. I mean, whichever flavor he wants it in, he can get it.
Wow. Do you know the sick thing? I had a white person who I don't know this person. She emailed me anonymously last year, a week or so before he came on the program in June. And she admitted, she said she read some of my comments that I had posted in a forum about seeing him in person. And she said she thinks that is a part of the atmosphere that is created when you hear him speak, is setting the stage for non-white people to have sex with a white person. This was an admitted white person, and she said she was gay. And she said that I don't have the same agenda that you do, but I just wanted to share this because her reasoning was, it bothers me when people lie to me, and I got the impression that Tim Wise was not telling me the truth, and it bothered me, and I had to think about what he was doing, and I came across, what you said in your program and everything, and I just wanted to share. But that she came to the same conclusion. She said, I think that environment is set up to create that sort of thing where sexual intercourse between white people and non-white people can happen more easily. He is the lubrication, if you will, for that sort of interaction.
That's what I observe, amongst other things. Yeah, I would agree with her assessment.
Wow.
I would totally agree. I mean, like I said, the couples that were in front of me, they made it obvious that they were together. Putting heads on shoulders, holding hands, hugged up, you know what I mean? Because I'm looking to see if they're going to display some affection to confirm whether or not they're together. Now, there were other couples that were there that didn't display the affection, so I didn't, focus on them. But the ones that did, I just happened to be sitting right behind.
Very interesting. That is a similar dynamic. I want to share that with listeners. That is a very similar dynamic. Mr. Nero is not in Washington State. I am in Washington State, and I observed him a year ago, and that's the exact same dynamic that I observed. And I know that a lot of non-white people, I think I said this. I think I can produce evidence that I said this a year ago, that there were non-white people sitting closely to white people, and it looked like they could be in a sexual relationship. Mr. Wise, even to make issue of that, I think anybody, if you observe people doing certain things, you conclude, okay, these people might be spending some time together in the bedroom. I don't know, but holding hands, head on the shoulder, I might conclude you all look pretty comfortable being very close to each other in an intimate, physical manner. But I saw a lot of the same thing when I saw him, and I was sharing with a non-white female who is conceding that Gus was right. I love it when I hear that. But I was telling her that even though Tim Wise is old and he's a little on the chubby side, he's not, what you consider a hunk. I bet Tim Wise could clean house with non-white females. And I would just tell people, look at the program that's featured with Thomas Norman DeWolf. There was a non-white female who called that show. She said she used to be married to a white person. I guess he practiced racism. They didn't get married. And she was just talking about being a victim. And she said that, I guess, Thomas DeWolf, he's been to the White Privilege Conference, and he said, wow, I'm just so thankful for you sharing all that. Wow, that's so courageous, da-da-da-da-da. And she said, I feel lighter. Underline that, highlight that. I feel lighter because you've heard my story. You validated what I had to say. This is recorded on the program. Tim Wise is able to do that like exponentially better than Thomas Norman DeWolf, and I think that is like, you talk about a pickup line, hook, line, and sinker. You will slam dunk most non-white people with that sort of approach. They would just be happy to death to hop in bed with a white person. I said that, and I saw that at the White Privilege Conference. I saw that same dynamic at the White Privilege Conference. That was what I was thinking the whole time he was talking. The exact same dynamic, I saw that played out at the White Privilege Conference, where if a white person speaks honestly about racism, they can really easily manipulate that non-white person. Go ahead.
Do you think that Tim Wise was sent by a group of people to, because the words that he used and the way he says certain things, it seems like he was well schooled by someone on how to actually talk about racism. And you think he was actually, trained before he came out about and started using all these terms that he keeps you like fair and certain code words? Because it seems like he's well prepared before he even came on the show. That's why the first 5 seconds of your show he's using it. So it seems like he is well prepared on how to talk to you about everything.
I don't know if someone specifically trained him. That could be possible, but in a system of racism, white supremacy, every white person will be equipped with tools to practice racism, white supremacy, and a core part of that package is the way you use words. And Tim Wise is incredibly refined with the ability to use words, whether he sharpened those tools on his own, whether, a racist white supremacist collective picked him and gave him those tools. He's got them. However he went about getting them, he's got them, and he's extraordinarily skilled at practicing racism, white supremacy in the way that he speaks, I suspect. I don't know how he acquired that talent, but he's got it. And even with that, I think I'm pretty niggerish. I don't have very many skills at all. But even with that, if you just pay attention to subtle things, you can easily catch, times where he's saying things that just do not make logical sense. Or just him using the term fair, if you're just paying attention. I mean, it almost becomes laughable. I mean, it's just, it really becomes laughable, particularly once you understand why that's incorrect. And he continues to do it. In all of his presentations, apparently he was doing it when Mr. Nero heard him. He continues to do it on this program. It just becomes laughable to hear him, yep, I'm 100% devoted to ending racism. That's a fair statement. I mean, it's almost like you got to be snickering saying this to me. Like, come on.
Seems like he's playing chess.
He is. That's what chess is. Racism, white supremacy. That's what chess is. White is the aggressor. Yes. Yes.
All I know is Tim the Mac Wise had on his suit. He was dapper, debonair. You know what I mean? Had just the one hand in the pocket like, hey, I am the man. Look at me. And then women fell out.
I tell you all this. If you think Al Sharpton and some of the other non-white people that we don't mind teasing and picking on and ridiculing their efforts, if you think they are effective in being able to mac non-white females, imagine a white person. Imagine a white person who I was told at the White Privilege Conference compared himself to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at a previous white privilege conference address. I was told this. I'm trying to get confirmation, but I was told he compared himself to a white latter-day version of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, just sit with that for a minute. Tim Wise, slick Tim Wise, as slick as he is with words, man.
Well, I know one thing. He's not going to let his wife listen to this show. Because if she's listening, I suggest she do some investigating on her own. Because I don't see how you fight those women off at every campus you go speak at. At some point, you got to give in. You know, even if your intentions are not to do, not to do anything like that, I would just think at some point, man, you would just get caught in a moment of weakness.
He travels a lot. He travels a lot.
Oh, man, some of them women I saw, I don't blame him. I travel too.
Kriya's been typing the whole time and saying that white women do not care about fidelity. That is not high on their list. She's probably out cheating and doing her thing too. She's been saying that. And that was in Flash Forward last week. That's a big theme in Flash Forward. White woman, no fidelity at all. I'm out here in the midst of global chaos. I'm still looking to do my thing. This marriage thing is just, whatever. We're not really taking that too seriously. Man, oh man. And I will tell you, as I said, Maria, non-white female, he agreed. She was helping him sell books. I am real certain if he is as slick with words when he talks about racism, if he's motivated to try and get some sexual activity, he would be murderous. He would be murderous. I mean, you could just put the notches on it would just be click, 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 click. Man. I mean, it's really sad. I mean, when you get to go see him in person, you really get to see what devastation looks like. Excuse me, let me make sure I get him correctly. Now, Mighty Wick. You see Tim Wise in person with non-white people in the audience, you will understand what domination looks like. And pay attention to the sex thing, because that's for sure. Pay attention to that sex thing. I'm glad somebody else observed that phenomenon in a totally different state and a year apart. I'm glad somebody else observed that dynamic because it's there and it's important. And I suspect and he's going to college campuses too. If they look like Malia Cunningham, the female that I met whom he spoke with at Chapman College, whoa.
Man, I'm telling you, however you wanted them. Light skin, dark skin, tall, short, voluptuous skin. I mean, they were just in all shapes and sizes.
I'm in the wrong business then.
I told you, I was just about jealous. I said, I don't believe this. Getting all the attention.
It's a hard job. Maybe that might be why, Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. One other thing, Gus. I'm assuming his talks are scripted.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
I don't know for sure, but I suspect so.
Yeah, I think it's scripted.
I think he had index cards when I saw him. It was a year ago. I could be wrong, but I think he had index cards.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I don't remember hearing any or any stoppages in his presentation at all. It was just all free flowing, and so I left away thinking, wow, this was all scripted. Seems like he has it all memorized.
Yeah.
Which can be done.
Oh, for sure.
It can be done. Yeah.
Especially if you speak as much as he does. I mean, the amount of talking he does on the college lecture circuit per month, I'm sure he has, several formulas already memorized, what he's going to say and all that good stuff. So,
right. And also, just want to also make sure I highlight the fact that he did not mention the cows.
Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Someone emailed me and they said, you don't think he's going to go out and promote the show. It doesn't really matter if he does it or not. As I said, that was not expected, but now with, having at least enough people listening that folks are able to go out and see him give these presentations. If he does it, that's great. People can listen, increase more followers. If he doesn't do it, that's great. We get more evidence. Show us your commitment to replacing white supremacy with justice. And if you can't even mention the program, can't even stop saying fair, that's showing me a lot right there. That's showing me a lot right there. At any rate, we'll be back tomorrow. Showtime is 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll have Dana R. Dana R. Carney. She'll be on the program tomorrow evening. I emailed her. This was a find from Mr. Josh Wickett. I emailed her to ask her to be a guest, and she emailed me back and she said, "I looked at your show page. Are you sure that you want a blonde white girl to come on your program and talk about racism?" And I was thinking, who would be better than a blonde white girl to talk about racism? And I told her something to that effect. And she said, "Oh, okay." And she emailed me back and she said, "I'm an expert on nonverbal communication of racism, power, and deception." She said, "An expert." She mailed me one of her papers. She gave me a brief summary that said, at the end of the day, all white people have deeply embedded racist views about, she said black people, I believe, but I suspect it would be non-white people in general. And she does work on how it's easier for people in power to be deceptive and to lie. That's her research. Real fascinating. As I said, this is an expert. Real fascinating research. I'm very much looking forward to having her on the show just to get the information about the deception part. I think that's great. She has a lot of information about how white people will attempt to correct and make sure that they're not being racist when they talk to a non-white person, and things you can do to pick out when that's happening, what to look for, verbally and non-verbally, what to look for. So should be excellent information from a blonde white girl. Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific, tomorrow on the Cows. Dana R. Carney. Check out Cree's program, Counter Racist Evolving Engineer. Dark Matter was on the program last week. Excellent presentation. I don't have my page up in front of me right now to see next program. Let's see. Okay, I have it up now. Let's see. On April 30th, there we go. April 30th at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Lenny Miller, April 30th, 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Pacific. Counter Racist Evolving Engineer. And also support the blog, Cree7.wordpress.com. Again, Cree7.wordpress.com. And Back of the Bus, his blog as well, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Dana R. Carney should be constructive. I hope so. And again, if you don't find the program constructive, you think Gus is crazy and, we're just being rude and beating up on Tim Wise for no reason. He's certainly not going around here cheating on his wife, having sex with these young, attractive, non-white college students at the many places that he goes out to give his lectures. Well, you, I'm sure, can find another program to talk about racism. Do not waste your time here if you do not think the information is helpful and or constructive. At any rate, we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, supporting the program. Hope it was worthy of your time and energy. Justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com. We'll be back soon. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Thank you. Cows signing out.